Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep. Welcome to the third session on internal security. In the last two classes, we have covered the linkages between development and extremism and left-wing extremism in India. Yesterday, we were at the last part of the chapter. We had to discuss the human rights situation in the Naxal corridor. So if you remember, yesterday we covered a number of important topics. We summarized the root causes that gave birth to Naxalism. We understood the spread and evolution of Naxalism. And we spoke about how India has countered left wing extremism through a twin approach. We studied the developmental approach and various initiatives and welfare programs. And we spoke about the security operations, the strategies and tactics adopted by our forces to counter Naxalism. So today we are at the last part of this discussion. We'll have a small discussion on the human rights situation, and then we'll look at the previous questions that have appeared in the mains exam from these chapters. So after that, we'll be starting with the next module, which is terrorism. We will focus on religious fundamentalism, state-sponsored terrorism, etc. So we have some very important discussions for today. Let's begin with the human rights situation in the Naxal corridor. Yesterday, I was mentioning that in any conflict zone, the civilians pay a heavy price. When an active conflict is going on, the civilians always pay a heavy price because, on one hand, they could be targeted by the extremists who are operating in the conflict zone. The insurgents, the terrorists who are operating, they could threaten the civilians, they could force them to extend support for their movement, and they could even target them. So extremists are the biggest violators of human rights. Through their violence, through their radicalism and their brutality, insurgents and terrorists, they commit large-scale human right violations. On the other hand, security forces could also become responsible for human right violations. As we were discussing yesterday, there could be certain cases where the civilians could become collateral damage, meaning they could accidentally get caught in the fight between the security forces and the extremists. As I told you yesterday, if let's say an encounter is taking place, accidentally security forces might open fire and they might injure or kill civilians. So civilians eventually get caught between the forces and the extremists. But the worst case scenario is when you have rogue officers in our security forces who break the law, who violate the law and deliberately commit human right violations. See, our security forces are largely professional, be it the Indian Armed Forces, the CAPFs. They're known for their professionalism, they're well trained, they understand the law of the land. They are sensitized about fundamental rights. They understand right to life. They understand that there will be consequences for their actions. If any wrongdoings are committed, tomorrow there could be inquiries, investigations, and if deliberate killings or tortures are committed, those rogue officers could be punished. So our forces are in general very professional. But in every conflict zone, there have been many serious allegations, accusations against our forces where allegedly large-scale human rights abuses have been committed. This is true in the case of the Naxal corridor as well. On one hand, the Naxals themselves are the biggest violators of human rights, as they threaten civilians to gain their support. They even target civilians who don't support them. And if they believe someone is a police informant, they will target that individual and their family, and they commit the biggest human right violations through the attacks that they carry out when they kill innocent civilians. The extremists are committing the biggest human right violations. But on the other hand, our security forces might also do this. You can't dismiss these allegations because there exists prima facie evidence in several instances where rogue officers have committed such large scale violations. Now, especially after a Naxal attack, let's say Naxals have carried out an ambush attack, they have killed few of our security forces. So that entire unit, that entire battalion, they would be angry. They would want revenge. They would want results. They would want to target those Naxals who committed this attack. This is understandable. But as state forces, they are supposed to be more responsible. They can't give into emotional responses. So sometimes what happens is that after attacks, some of the officers, they put pressure on the local civilians. They raid the local villages, they threaten them, seeking information about the Naxals who carried out the attack. Sometimes they will illegally arrest and detain the locals. There have been instances where they've destroyed entire villages in search for intelligence. They could even commit kidnappings and torture in order to extract information. And there are also cases where fake killings, fake encounters have been carried out. Rapes and molestations have been carried out. So various media reports, then civil society groups, human rights organizations, and even the judiciary, they have brought out several cases into the limelight. Now, I'm stressing on this point because in a conflict zone, you cannot have your security forces committing these violations. And if the government doesn't investigate them, if the government doesn't hold those rogue officers accountable and punish them, then we will be setting the wrong example. We will be setting a wrong precedent because this will create a distance between the people and our security forces. They will no longer trust the security forces. They will not have faith in the Indian state. That is exactly what the extremists want. They will further exploit this to indoctrinate people and radicalize them and get more support. So state forces have to be more responsible. The government has to ensure that there is full accountability. Under any circumstances, you cannot have your officers committing human right violations. But in the Naxal corridor or in any conflict zone, there will be some cases here and there which happens that brings a bad name to the entire force. And if governments try to cover up those cases, if they don't investigate them properly, if they don't deliver the strictest of punishment to these rogue officers, then they will set a wrong example. Because see, governments, what they do, they are worried about the political outcomes. If they try to conduct investigations honestly and transparently, that will bring political pressure from the opposition, from the media, from the public. So usually most governments, they try to brush up these cases. They don't give approvals for investigations to happen. And even though wrongdoing would have happened, they will try to cover up such cases. So many such instances have come to the limelight. And it's only with the intervention of the media, the judiciary, and other organs that such incidents have come out. So this creates further resentment. It creates a distance between the locals and the state. If the people who are affected, the families which are affected, if they don't get justice, right, they will lose faith in the constitution. They will lose faith in the government, in the judiciary, and they'll become vulnerable for further radicalization by the extremists. So it is extremely important to maintain the highest professional conduct by our security forces. Now, this issue will come up again when we discuss Kashmir, Northeast India, and Punjab. In all the conflict zones, there are very, very serious allegations against our forces regarding such brutal human rights violations. And In Northeast India, in Jammu and Kashmir, and also in Punjab, a very controversial law had been implemented to fight insurgency and terrorism. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act, or AFSPA, had been implemented. It is still present in many of the conflict zones. Under AFSPA, the security forces get tremendous powers. And there are accusations that these powers are often misused by the forces, which leads to human rights violations. So we will discuss AFSPA in a separate session when we cover Northeast India, Jammu and Kashmir, and Khalistan. That is where I will have a discussion on AFSPA, because that is where AFSPA had been implemented. AFSPA has not been implemented in the Naxal corridor. AFSPA has not been implemented in the Naxal corridor. If you ask me why, it's again the same reason. The same reason why we haven't deployed armed forces to fight Naxals. Since Naxalism is largely an internal conflict, it's rooted in genuine root causes, it's a domestic movement with limited foreign support. Deploying armed forces and implementing strict laws like AFSPA could lead to even large-scale violations. So governments are aware of it, and hence AFSPA has consciously not been implemented in the Naxal areas. Even without AFSPA, there are allegations of human rights violations, especially by state police forces. Compared to your central forces and armed forces, state police are having a very bad reputation of being more brutal. So, at the hands of state police forces and sometimes at the hands of central forces as well, there are such certain incidents in several states where these allegations exist. In Chhattisgarh, in Odisha, in West Bengal and Bihar. Over the last 50, 60 years, there are many instances where government forces have been accused of committing fake killings, rapes, molestations, etc. But in very few cases, honest investigations have happened. In very few cases, the rogue officers, the guilty officers have been punished. Majority of the cases have been brushed aside. They have been covered up. So this creates that cycle of hatred, resentment, and violence, which is easily exploited by the extremists. So it's very, very important to address the human rights issue in any conflict zone. Now, in the Naxal corridor, there was one more practice which had raised a lot of concern, especially in Chhattisgarh, known as Salva Judum. Some of you might have heard about it. Salva Judum was a private militia that was raised by the Chhattisgarh government and the Chhattisgarh police. With the backing of the government of Chhattisgarh and the police of Chhattisgarh, in their fight against Naxalism, they backed a private armed group called Salva Judum. It was started in 2005 by a local political leader, a local politician who was often threatened by Naxals. He began this armed movement, which was later backed by the Chhattisgarh police and the Chhattisgarh government. What they did was, they supported a local tribe. They supported members of a local tribe called the Koya tribe. The Koya is a indigenous community in Chhattisgarh that resides in the forests of the Dandakaranya region. This local politician, he backed the tribe. He supplied arms and weapons to them in the name of fighting Naxals and in the name of self-defense. Later, the Chhattisgarh police and state government backed the Koya members to retain their arms and weapons, and they were even given the title of special police officers. They were given the designation of special police officers or SPOs, and they were popularly called as Koya commandos. So by placing arms and weapons in the hands of a local tribe, the state was encouraging the private militia to target the Naxals. And for every Naxal that they would kill, they would be rewarded. For every Naxal killed by Koya commandos, they would get a financial reward. Now, some of you might say that, what's wrong with this? This appears to be a great strategy. If locals are also helping the security forces to target extremists, what is wrong with it? It's a great strategy. It will help the police forces to target Naxals. That is one side of the argument. But let me tell you why such a practice is extremely dangerous. In a democratic state, in a constitutional democracy, you cannot have private armed militias being supported by the state. That is entirely unconstitutional, because it is only government forces which have the right to take someone's life when really required. What does Article 21 say? Article 21 guarantees right to life as a fundamental right, one of the most important fundamental rights. The state has the right to take your life, but only under the procedure established by law. Only as per the procedure established by law, the state has the right to take someone's life. Meaning, there are checks and balances when security forces conduct their operations and end up killing someone. Even if there is a fake killing, security forces can be held accountable. There can be inquiries, there can be investigations to see whether it was a genuine encounter. If wrongdoings have been committed by our forces, they can be punished. So there is accountability in the system. The judiciary can look into those cases. But if private militia is committing such violence and the state is supporting them, then that would be blatantly unconstitutional. Because local tribes, they have no education, they don't understand the constitution, they have no knowledge of Article 21, they don't understand human rights, they don't understand the legal implications and consequences. And in many cases, what happened was the Koya commandos, the so-called Koya commandos, they would use the power, the authority given to them. And in many cases, they largely misused it. Several incidents have been documented where these Salwa Judum members, they would kill their rivals from other tribes, other groups. They would target them and kill them, and then brand them as Naxals. Because see, they could not only settle their personal rivalries and personal scores, but they could also get a reward. The police and the government would reward them if they brought someone as a Naxal. So how easy is for this to go wrong, right? So several members of the Koya tribe who were given the designation of SPOs, they started misusing this power and authority. They had weapons in their hands, support of the police, encouragement of the government, along with the incentive. So they would go out and kill their rivals if they had personal rivalries or enmity. Let's say there is a property dispute or a family dispute. They would kill those people, right? And then place some weapons in their hands and call them as Naxals and claim their reward. This is what happens when a government directly or indirectly sponsors a private armed militia. This private militia in Chhattisgarh was called Salwa Judum, or the so-called Koya commandos. This practice led to large-scale human rights violations in Chhattisgarh. So as a result, civil society activists and human rights activists, they approached the Supreme Court. Several incidents were exposed where the Koya commandos had committed fake killings and human rights violations, and these cases reached the Supreme Court. The constitutional validity of Salwa Judum was challenged in court. And in a landmark case, in the Nandini Sundar case of 2011, the Supreme Court declared this practice as illegal and unconstitutional. the Supreme Court of India, in the landmark Nandini Sundar versus State of Chhattisgarh, it declared that creating a private militia and empowering them to kill people is unconstitutional. That right, that authority exists only with security forces of the state, of the government. Private armed militias cannot be raised and sponsored in a democratic state, in a constitutional democracy like India. The Supreme Court heavily criticized the Chhattisgarh government and state police and declared this practice as unconstitutional. It immediately ordered Salwa Judum to be disbanded. Is that clear? So this is a very, very important topic that you should be aware of. Even though it's an old development, it is still very relevant. Because recently there have been some disturbing reports. There have been some disturbing media reports that the practice of Salwa Judum, has apparently continued indirectly even after Supreme Court declared it as unconstitutional. This is very disturbing. Despite the clear orders of the Supreme Court to stop this practice and disband Salwa Judum, according to these allegations, the Chhattisgarh police are still secretly supporting Salwa Judum and it still exists on the ground. The Koya tribe members, they are still apparently targeting Naxals. They still have the indirect backing of the state and the state police. These are very serious accusations, violating the Supreme Court's orders. The two, when such a serious issue has been declared as unconstitutional, is a major violation if it is true. So that is why the topic becomes relevant. Is that clear? So while discussing these sensitive topics, you have to be a little careful. You can't blindly accuse our security forces to be committing human rights violations. Is that clear? You have to present both sides of the argument. As I discussed, you have to mention that extremists are the biggest human rights violators. Insurgents and terrorists are committing large-scale human rights violations by targeting civilians. Then you need to mention that our forces are largely professional, but sometimes there could be accidental killings. Civilians could become collateral damage. But there could be other instances as well where few rogue officers could bring a bad name to the entire force and the government by violating human rights. You can say that there are allegations, accusations, which is backed by investigative reports, judicial inquiries. So then your argument becomes more substantial. It will not be a biased argument. So you can't simply accuse security forces and say that they have committed human rights violations. You can't conclude that. You can say that there have been media reports, there have been judicial inquiries, which has pointed towards alleged human rights violations. You can say that prima facie, on the face of it, it appears that there is evidence to link some of the rogue officers with some of these fake killings, rapes, tortures, etc. So these are instances and allegations which has to be taken seriously by the state, by the government. Transparent investigations have to happen, and if officers are guilty, they should be punished. They should not be spared. The government has to make an example out of them so that no one will ever dare repeat those mistakes. Because as I told you, the state forces have a bigger burden. Compared to extremists, see, extremists have no boundaries. But our security forces are not the same as extremists. Then what's the difference between us and them? The state has a bigger responsibility. Even though it's a difficult environment, even though they are risking their lives, they have a responsibility to behave professionally as they are trained, as they are taught. So ensuring the highest level of integrity from our forces is very, very important. This applies for every conflict zone, not just Naxal corridor. Is that clear? Using the proportionate force, following the standard operating procedures, ensuring that the law is followed strictly is very, very important. So kindly be ready to have a small discussion or a debate on human rights issues as well in a conflict zone. Questions can come up in the interview, right? The interview panel, they might put you in the spot. They could deliberately ask controversial questions to put you in the spot, to check whether you can provide balanced arguments. You can't blindly deny that no violations have happened. Then it means you're biased. You're just taking one side of the argument. Similarly, you can't make blind accusations against our forces. You can't say that all security forces have committed large scale violations. You need to take a balanced stand, as we discussed. There could be mains questions, there could be an essay topic, an entire essay topic on human rights situation in India's conflict zones, right? So we will revisit this topic when we discuss AFSPA. When we come to Northeast India, Kashmir, etc., we will revisit this topic. So this completes my discussion on Naxalism. So with this, we have completed the first two topics. The entire module is done. If you have any questions, any doubts, please raise them. I'll answer them as well. In the meanwhile, take a look at the previous questions that have appeared from these chapters. I'll discuss a couple of questions. I'll try to give you an idea as to how to approach answer writing in mains. All right. First, let me look at your doubts and questions. In the meantime, you can go through the questions and then I'll discuss a couple of questions as well. Ravindra Babu is asking, could you please let me know how much contribution to prelims from internal security? See, internal security, as I told you in the first class, is a mains oriented subject. It's largely for the mains exam. But there can be one or two questions, maybe 2-3 questions in your prelims. It depends. We can't say that you will get these many questions in prelims. UPSC keeps it very dynamic. You might get 0 questions in some years. In a good year, you might even get 4-5 questions related to internal security. You never know. Is that clear? So it could be anywhere between 0 to 5. Understood? So it's largely mains oriented subject, but you might get some questions in prelims. Shreyash is asking how Greyhound is legal and Salwa Judum is not. See, please understand the difference. Greyhound is a special force belonging to the Andhra Pradesh police. Greyhounds of Andhra Pradesh, they are part of the state. They are state forces. Salwa Judum was a private militia, a local tribe being supplied arms and weapons and being encouraged to go and kill Naxals. So Salwa Judum was a private militia, whereas Greyhounds are a special force belonging to the state. Is that clear? Greyhounds are like your NSG, your Black Cat Commandos. So they are part of state forces. So there is a big difference between the two. Kostub is asking, sir, in the context of Salwa Judum being unconstitutional, what are the grounds on which the government has revived the training of village defense guards in the Kashmir Valley? It's a very good question, Kostub. Recently in Jammu and Kashmir, a similar practice has been restarted by the government of India. You might have heard about the village defense guards, the village defense committees near the line of control with Pakistan. As infiltration and terror attacks have increased, the government of India restarted an old practice. Back in 1990s, when militancy was at its peak in Kashmir, where militants were targeting civilians in the border villages, the government of India started training the local villagers and it created village defense committees where local villagers could defend themselves. They were given weapons in their hands. They were given arms training by the government forces so they could act against these militants. Now, let me tell you why this practice is different from Salwa Judum. In the case of village defense guards, which has been restarted now, their role is mainly defense. Meaning, if in the border areas, if there is a terror attack against the local village, only then the village defense guards can use their weapons to defend the village, to defend themselves. They can't go hunting for terrorists. That is not allowed. Whereas Salwa Judum, the members of Koya commandos, they were encouraged to hunt Naxals. They were encouraged to carry out targeted offensive operations. So there is a big difference between the two. But these concerns exist with village defense guards as well. In fact, back in 1990s, the practice of village defense guards was stopped because of the same concern. Even in Jammu and Kashmir, even though the purpose was to arm the local villagers to defend themselves, many cases came up where villagers were misusing their powers and their weapons. They were committing human right violations, killing their rivals and their personal enemies and branding them as terrorists. Once these accusations came up, immediately the practice was stopped. So now it has been revived again. The two are slightly different, but the same concerns do exist. If you ask how village defense guards are constitutional, it is constitutional. It has not been challenged as of now because their role is defensive, to protect themselves if there is a terror attack. Whereas in case of Salwa Judum, they were asked to target and hunt Naxals in an offensive role. So that is the big difference between the two. But human right violations can happen in both cases. If someone files a case and raises the constitutional question that how village defense guards are constitutional, then the court will have to decide whether the practice is constitutional or not. But if you look at it from a technical viewpoint and from the government's viewpoint, Salwa Judum and village defense guards are different. Their roles are different. So that's why the government feels it's a legal practice, it's a justified method to help the local villagers to protect themselves. Is that clear? So constitutionality will have to be decided by the court, by the Supreme Court. Abhishek is asking, what is action plan for theater in Samadhan doctrine? See, when you're talking about military strategies, security operations, the term theater refers to a region. Like we say maritime theater, the Pakistan theater, the Northwest theater. Theater is a geographical reference to a region, reference to a medium where the war is being fought. Is that clear? So in the case of Naxalism, the different theaters of conflict are the different states and districts where the fight is going on between our forces and Naxals. So A in Samadhan doctrine stands for action plan for each theater, meaning there should be a customized plan to fight Naxals in every state, in every district. Apart from the national plan that we already have, right? You can't just have a uniform approach because fighting Naxals in West Bengal is different from fighting Naxals in Telangana. Fighting Naxals in Odisha is different from fighting Naxals in Maharashtra. So for every state, for every district, there should be a separate action plan by the security forces. So that's what you mean by action plan for each theater. Pratima is asking, village defense committees in J&K is fundamentally different from Salwa Judum. Yes, you're absolutely right. Fundamentally, the village defense committees are different from Salwa Judum. As I told you, village defense committees, their role is to defend themselves. If terrorists sneak from POK, from Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and target local villagers, then the village defense committees can open fire to defend the village. Because security forces might take time to reach. Correct? Precious time could be lost and villagers could be killed. So everyone has a right to self-defense. Whereas Salwa Judum is meant for targeted offensive operations. So fundamentally, both are different. So that is why government feels that village defense committees are legal and constitutional. That is why it has been revived and restarted. But again, constitutionality can be challenged because back in 1990s, village defense committees were stopped because there were allegations of human rights violations even there, even in Jammu and Kashmir. So if someone files that case challenging the constitutional validity, then it is for the Supreme Court to decide. But as of now, it is legal because the government sees this as a fundamentally different approach compared to Salwa Judum. Is that clear? Anjali is asking, in interview, how do we not show a bias in human rights abuse topic? As I told you, present all sides of the argument. I discussed this 2-3 times. Talk about human rights violations that extremists are carrying out. Talk about collateral damage where civilians get caught between the security forces and the extremists. And then also mention that there are some disturbing developments. There are some serious allegations that some of the security forces, some rogue officers, have allegedly committed human right violations. You're not concluding that they have committed. You're saying it's an allegation, it's an accusation. There are credible media reports, investigative reports, judicial inquiries, which has shown evidence to prove that some rogue officers have committed violations. So when you present all sides of the argument, it becomes a balanced, unbiased argument. Shyam is asking, sir, in fourth question, what is the meaning of determinants? Are you referring to the mains question given here? Okay, I see this. You're referring to this word, determinants. Determinants are basically the factors. Okay, let's start with this question itself. The question says, it was asked in 2020. Question says, what are the determinants of left-wing extremism in eastern part of India? What strategy does the government, civil administration and security forces adopt to counter the threat in the affected area? That is the question. So determinants are nothing but factors. What factors have contributed to Naxalism in eastern parts of India? Now, first let me provide some general points about answer writing. I'm sure many of you would be struggling with it. I know that. I know it's not easy to start answer writing practice. I know it is a big challenge to get better at answer writing. So I would like to have a small general discussion. It will help you in every subject, right? I really hope this discussion will help you. Then after that, we'll discuss how you can tackle these questions. See, in mains, UPSC is very, very clear about its expectation from you. If you go through the notification, if you've gone through the UPSC notification and syllabus, you would have noticed that UPSC has clearly laid out its expectations from your mains answers. If you haven't seen this, please go take a look. Download the notification and go through it. You will find clear statements by UPSC telling you what they are expecting from you. You can't write random answers. You will not get marks. See, those who sit for mains, the 12, 13,000 odd aspirants who clear prelims, all of them will have good knowledge. Whoever sits for mains, they wouldn't have cleared it by fluke, by luck. They would have cleared it because they had good foundational knowledge, good concepts, good in current affairs. That's why they cleared prelims. So you have to assume that all 13,000 aspirants writing the mains exam, they all know the same content. They know about Naxalism. They know when it started. They know the whole story just like you. If you simply dump your knowledge blindly without reading the question, without understanding the question, you are not going to get marks. Is that clear? UPSC will penalize answers which do not address the question. Now, let's say this question, question number 4. You glance at this question, you take a look at this question. You just see the word left-wing extremism. You just see the word government, civil administration, security forces. How are they countering the threat? You don't read it, the question properly. You don't understand what the question is asking, and you blindly start writing about it. Let's say you defined Naxalism. You wrote about Maoist philosophy, the origin of the Maoist doctrine, how Naxalism started in India, right? If you discussed how Naxals are raising their funds, how they are procuring arms and weapons. If you write all of this without structuring your answer, without addressing the question, you're not going to get good marks, even though your points are correct. Just because you know about Naxalism doesn't mean you write everything here. You have to read the question carefully, understand the question, think before you answer. Because UPSC has clearly said it wants a well-structured answer. Your answer has to be structured. From the start to the end, there has to be a structure. There has to be a logical flow of thought. So it means you can't write random points. You're not in school or in your college where you just look at the topic and dump everything that you know. Right? This is not a memory-based exam. You're not rewarded for rote memory. All right? You need to understand what the question is asking. To build a structured answer, you have to address the question. You have to read the question carefully. So the first step in writing a good answer is to read the question twice. Spend 20-30 seconds. Don't rush through. Don't hurry. Don't panic. Take your time. Read the question carefully. Read it twice if you want. Highlight the key words. And always pay attention. In every question, there can be sub-questions. Usually, it will be there. UPSC format is such that mains question will have 2 to 3 sub-questions. Sometimes it can be 4 sub-questions. You have to address all of them. Sometimes there will be one statement and then there will be a question. If you don't address the first statement and simply write an answer to the second question, you're not going to get full marks. Even the first statement has to be tackled. Either you should agree with it or disagree with it, provide your arguments to support your stand, and then I'd come to the second part of the question. Now, if you look at question number 4, clearly there are 2 parts in this question. The first part is asking you what are the determinants in the spread of left-wing extremism in eastern part of India. Meaning it is asking, why did Naxalism spread? What factors contributed to the spread of Naxalism in eastern India? Be careful. If you start talking about all the factors, from tribal factors to farmers, livelihood, land, everything, again you will lose marks. It's not asking about Naxalism in India. It is asking about Naxalism in eastern India. That is Bihar, West Bengal, to an extent Jharkhand. Why did Naxalism start here? That is the question. We have studied this. Naxalism did not start here because of tribal issues. It started mainly because of the feudal nature of the society. It started because of the failure of land reforms. It was started by the farmers, peasants, landless laborers, not by tribal communities, not by industrial workers. So you have to specifically address that issue. Talk about Naxalbari. Talk about the feudal nature of the society in West Bengal and Bihar, which represents the eastern part of India. That is the specific discussion you should have. If you write about Naxalism in Andhra Pradesh, about PWG, Naxalism in Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, you will not get marks. Even though you're correct, your points are correct, you will not get marks. Because question is asking you, what factors contributed to Naxalism in eastern India? Without reading the question carefully, you will not catch this. If you just read left-wing extremism and determinants, you will jump to writing the answer. You will miss the eastern part of India. So evaluator gets to know that you haven't read the question, you haven't understood the question. So even though they might give few marks because some points could be correct, they will penalize you. They will cut some marks. The only way to score high is to carefully read the question word by word. Every word is important. And addressing every question in the given question. Because there are sub-questions, there are sub-components in every question. There can be 2, 3, or 4 different questions in every single question. Now, if you don't do justice to each of them, again, you will not get full marks. All right? So what should you do? Since UPSC is expecting a structured answer with a logical flow of thought, and your answers have to be precise, you can't beat around the bush. You can't write random stories and expect to get marks. Again, it's not your school, it's not your college or university exam. I'm sure all of us have done that, correct? Question is asking something else. We all write something else in our colleges and schools, and we do get some marks as well, because unfortunately, that's how the educational system has become. But UPSC is different. UPSC expects a higher knowledge from you, higher understanding from you, and a thorough approach from you. Since the answers have to be precise, And don't forget, there is a strict word limit. The word limit is very strict. 150 words, 250 words. You have to take that into account. Now, doesn't mean that you should sit and count the number of words you're writing. You can't do that physically. You'll waste your time. And even evaluators, they'll not sit and count how many words you're writing. No one will do that. But based on their experience, based on the number of pages you're writing, your handwriting, they'll get to know how many approximate words you're writing. If you've seen the answer booklet, there is a specific amount of pages that are given for every question. The moment you cross, let's say, 300 words for a 250 word question, evaluator will get to know that you are exceeded by 50 words. See, they'll not strictly count. Like, let's say you write the answer in 260 words, they'll not penalize you. You wrote the answer in 230 words, they'll not penalize you. Plus or minus 20, 30 is fine. Even if you write the answer in 270, 275 words, evaluator will not penalize you. They'll not sit and count each word. All right. But if you cross 300, or if you finish your answer in 100 words, they'll get to know you haven't stuck to the word limit. They will cut marks. There will be negative marking for this. All right. So please pay attention to the word limit. Now, how do you develop this habit? As I told you, you also can't sit and count how many words you're writing for every question. You don't have that kind of time. This comes with practice. Download the answer booklets. It's available on the internet. Use the same UPSC answer booklet for practice, because you'll get the same space, the amount of space to write. Now, each person's handwriting is different. How we space the words is different. Maybe I can fit 50 words in one page. You can fit 80 words in one page. So maybe for once, when you're practicing at home, count how many words you're writing. In your handwriting, in your style, how many words fit in one answer sheet. So by counting the pages, you'll get to know. Let's say I write for 3 pages and each page has some 80 words. Okay, I know that there are these many words. There are 240 words. I'm well within the word limit. If I write 5 pages, obviously I've breached the word limit. Evaluators will get to know. So this is again part of your practice. The more you practice, the more answers you write, you will develop these skills. Answer writing is an art. It's not a talent. It's not that you're born with it. It's not that someone is gifted naturally with good answer writing skills. It's a skill that you develop. It's an art. It comes only with practice. Anybody can become good at answer writing. Only if you're consistent, if you practice regularly, you will start writing good answers. Is that clear? So that is the approach. So second part of the question, what is it asking? What strategy has the government followed, the civil administration followed, and security forces followed to counter the threat of Naxalism in Eastern India? Basically, the strategies adopted, the developmental approach, security approach, which is little specific to Eastern India. So talk about that. Mention government initiatives. Talk about integrated action plan, the various welfare programs. If you're aware of any programs by the state governments of West Bengal and Bihar, you can mention that. You can mention how the overall development of the region has helped in countering Naxalism, how grassroots governance and administration has improved, what approach security forces have taken in their offensive operations. Because today, in Eastern India, Naxalism has declined. Bihar, West Bengal have largely become free from Naxalism. You have to mention that, mention the current status. So these are the kind of points you discuss. So you arrange this in a logical order. There should be an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. All right? Don't beat around the bush. Don't define Naxalism. Don't explain Maoist principles. Don't explain the origin of Maoism. Question is not asking for that. You're going to waste your word limit. You'll waste your time limit. Time is crucial here. You will barely get 7.5 minutes per question for 10-mark question. For maybe 15-mark question, you will get around 10 to 11 minutes, not more than that. If you breach the time limit, you will eventually lose out on time. You'll have to leave 2-3 questions at the end. So you don't have the luxury of wasting time and writing extra points. So don't beat around the bush. Don't write any unnecessary point. UPSC will not expect you to define left-wing extremism. The question is not asking that, right? If they wanted that, they would have asked, what is left-wing extremism? They're not asking here. So don't sit and define left-wing ideology. What is Naxalism? Where did Maoism start? That is not the question. Question is about Naxalism in Eastern India. That is the question. So start directly with 1967, Naxalbari. Start with the feudal society, the land issues. That is where it started. Then discuss the strategy. So once you get a hook on this, once you get hold of this approach, answer writing becomes easy. Is that clear? So have a logical flow. In the introduction, always try to present the argument that is expected from you. Make your stand very clear in the introduction itself. Then in the body, provide substantiating arguments. Provide some data, some facts and figures, examples, some current developments. That is how you justify and substantiate your stand that you took in the introduction. Then finally, conclude on the same lines. Because you can't have a different conclusion. Your introduction conclusion has to be a little similar. They have to be in line. Now, in introduction, I can't say something else, and in conclusion, I can't take a different stand. I can't contradict myself in the answer. That's why UPSC says there should be a logical flow of thought. So whatever stand I take in the introduction, I should end on the same note with a similar consistent stand. I will explain my stand in the body with examples, with arguments, data, or even drawings or maps, whatever is required, flow chart. You have the freedom to explore that, right? You can write in bullet points, in paragraphs. It's up to you. Each student is different, right? So depending on the question, depending on your skill, decide how you will approach answer writing. So there is no one way to write answers. I can only guide you in a general approach, but it's up to you how you will build this skill. So this comes with practice. Every day, take up 1 or 2 questions for answer writing practice. See, you're attending classes in the morning. You will read newspapers or watch Hindu analysis. Then you will read one subject on your own, maybe some optional subject on your own. So before you go to bed in the night, just before you go to bed, just keep 15 to 20 minutes aside. Take 2 questions from what you have studied. Maybe 1 question from the morning class, 1 question from newspaper, right? We provide you questions, or make your own question, or take a previous year's question. Take 2 questions from what you have read that day. And before hitting the bed, just 15 to 20 minutes, write an answer. Do this every day. And whenever possible, get your answers evaluated. Correct? We also help you in evaluation. And by the way, regarding paper evaluation, I have a very important announcement. We have noticed that the answers you guys are sending for evaluation, many of you, you're not mentioning the subject name. In the email, in the subject line, please mention which subject is it, or else it becomes very difficult for us on the back end to sort the answers. It will delay our evaluation and the feedback which is given to you. Is that clear? Please remember this. It's a request from our side. When you're sending your answers for evaluation, please mention the subject name in the subject line of the email. Don't forget. So this is how you practice. Every day, 2 questions. Do this for 3 months. Then trust me, you will be in a much better position. I know initially it is difficult. You'll not know how to start, where to start. Don't worry about all that. Remove those constraints from your head. Start writing. First week, your answers will be very bad. Second week, it will slightly improve. After 1 month, there will be a bigger improvement. That is life, correct? The more you hold on, you will never start. You will never get that practice. Initially, no one is good. Maybe there could be some gifted aspirants who write very good answers from the beginning, who are good in essay writing, etc. Not everyone has that skill, but everyone can develop it. Everyone can develop that skill and talent with effort, with consistency. So do this every day. And trust me, you will thank me later. This is the right time. Start every day. 2 questions. It will take 15-20 minutes, not more than that. And get some feedback as well. Give your paper to your friends, your peers who are preparing, your teachers, your mentors, right? Our mentors are available, or any seniors that you know, your professors in your colleges. Get it evaluated once in a while. You get a feedback from them. Based on that, make some changes in your answer writing style. So that is how you get better at answer writing. There is no easy approach here. There's no spoon feeding. Dictation of notes will not help. Giving you a ready material will not help. It's all about using your knowledge. You all have the knowledge. It's getting built up through our classes, through your preparation. It's about bringing it out and presenting it in front of the evaluator. Is that clear? Trust me, if you don't practice answer writing, you cannot clear this exam. I'm not discouraging you. I'm telling you the fact. If a student does not practice answer writing, if they write few test papers in the end, they cannot clear this exam. Impossible. The ones who have cleared are the ones who have practiced answer writing for weeks and months together. Is that clear? So it is that important. Clearing prelims is different. Clearing mains is entirely different. So this is what I wanted to say with regard to your answer writing. I hope it has helped you. I hope it's not a waste of time. I know we have taken good 15-20 minutes, but I feel it's important to guide you regarding the approach to answer writing. Okay, now let's look at one more question and then we can start the next chapter. Look at these questions, these two questions that had come in 2013, 2015. This question is asking about Article 244 of the Indian Constitution. Article 244 relates to administration of scheduled areas and tribal areas. That is one part of the question. It's a statement. Analyze the impact of non-implementation of provisions of fifth schedule on the growth of left-wing extremism. Now, some of you might ask, sir, what is this question? You didn't mention Article 244. You didn't discuss this at all. But we actually did. We did discuss this. We spoke about fifth schedule, the scheduled areas, how special provisions are given for the administration of tribal areas. Article 244 deals with the same. It deals with fifth schedule areas, right? So that is where you bring your polity knowledge. Link polity with internal security. So what you can do, first statement, you can address that in the introduction itself. Here you can mention what is Article 244 and fifth schedule in the introduction. What does it deal with? A small introduction, what kind of special provisions are given for the welfare of scheduled areas. Then in the body, talk about its non-implementation. Discuss some examples regarding how enough development has not been carried out in the scheduled areas, despite the constitutional guarantees. You can mention the PESA Act, the Forest Rights Act, how local governance has not improved, right? You can give specific examples. That's why reading editorials is important, even columns in the Hindu and Indian Express, because every now and then there will be some beautiful articles mentioning the governance issues in some tribal areas. So there you make notes, you take down those examples. Like there could be the Vidarbha region, which we discussed, the Amravati belt, which is affected by droughts, farmer suicides, the Swabhiman Anchal example I gave you in Odisha, right? So be aware of such specific examples. In Odisha, there was one more incident. At Niyamgiri Hills, a mining project was proposed to mine bauxite. Vedanta Group had won a license to mine bauxite. But Niyamgiri Hills is rich with biodiversity and it's home to a native tribe. Does anyone know which tribe resides in the Niyamgiri Hills? It's very popular. It's known for its bauxite reserves. Does anyone know which tribe can be found in Niyamgiri in Odisha? Vedashri says Bill, not the Bill tribe. The Gonds, Dongri. You guys are very close. It's the Dongriya Kond. The Dongriya Kond tribe. They are indigenous to Niyamgiri Hills. They fought a legendary battle, a legal battle. They didn't fall into Naxal ideology. See, this mining project, which was proposed by Odisha government and Vedanta Group, was threatening the Dongriya tribe. The project would have caused pollution, affecting the health of the tribe. They would have lost their land, their resources, their identity would have been affected. But still, the Dongriya Kond, they did not fall under Naxal ideology. Despite the failure of implementation of these provisions, you know what Dongria Kond tribe did? They took the help of activists and approached the Supreme Court. They fought a legendary case against the mining project and they won their rights. So these are some examples. In West Bengal, there was a massive industrial project that had been proposed, which included the Tata Group as well. Tata Nano plant, the nano car plant was supposed to come up in West Bengal. This was strongly opposed by locals who feared that they would lose their land. So it became an issue between the government and industrialists on one side, the local poor people on the other side. So mention such examples where these controversies have come up to show the failure of non-implementation, the non-implementation of fifth schedule. And then discuss the strategies. How can we improve governance? In the last part of your body and conclusion, give suggestions. Take examples of various initiatives like Integrated Action Plan, the PM Janman scheme. Give examples like this from current affairs to show how the government is trying to improve governance in these areas. Next, 2015 question. It appears to be a big, difficult question, but it's not. It's very simple. Question says the persisting drive of the government for development of large industries in backward areas have resulted in isolating the tribal population and farmers who face multiple displacements. So that is one part of the question. With Malkangiri Naxalbari foci, discuss the corrective strategies needed to win the left-wing extremist doctrine affected citizens and bring them back into mainstream of socio-economic growth. I agree. Initially, it appears to be a big, difficult question. But if you understand carefully, if you read it again, the question is very simple and straightforward. It's asking about how large industrial development in backward areas has led to tribal displacement. That is the question. Didn't we discuss this? We mentioned some examples as well. So that is what you write about in your introduction and first part of the body. How large industrial development, industrial projects like creating factories, mining projects, etc., how they have led to displacement of tribal communities. How tribal communities have lost their land, their livelihood. Is that clear? That's what you address in the first part. Then what is Malkangiri Naxalbari foci? The question is referring to the hotbeds of Naxalism. Naxalbari in West Bengal, where Naxalism started. Malkangiri in Chhattisgarh, which is the hotbed. Malkangiri, in Odisha. Malkangiri in the Chhattisgarh-Odisha belt, which today is the hotbed of Naxalism. So with focus on Malkangiri and Naxalbari, discuss the corrective strategies needed to defeat Naxalism. That's all the question is asking. So talk about Naxalbari briefly, why Naxalism started in Naxalbari, how it's connected to land issues. Mention Malkangiri, how Naxalism has increased here, and mention that it's largely related to tribal factors. Once you mention that, then you can discuss what measures have been taken. The developmental measures, security measures, administrative measures. Discuss all that, give examples. And you can say that this is how the government is trying to bring the affected people back into the mainstream and provide for socio-economic growth. That's it. Your answer is done. All right. So I'm just giving you the approach. Of course, you have to put that effort to write the answer. All right. So I hope it's been a useful discussion. Do let me know how it went. Do let me know if you want more such suggestions in other classes, in coming classes as well, so I can give some time to it. But if you feel it's enough, we can just focus on the classes. All right. So now let us start with the next chapter. We'll be starting with terrorism. It's a very, very important chapter. We'll try to cover this today and tomorrow and in the next class. That's on Monday. Today is Friday. So today and Monday, we'll try to take up this chapter. Very interesting chapter. Very important as well. Because see, don't forget, India is one of the biggest victims of terrorism in the world. India has faced the biggest threat from terrorism. The government of India always says this at United Nations, that we are the biggest victim of terrorism. We have suffered immensely because of terrorism. Thousands of our security forces have been killed by terrorists. Hundreds of our civilians have been killed by terrorists. It has threatened our integrity and sovereignty. It has destabilized the country. So as a result, the topic becomes extremely important. So in this chapter, we will cover some basic concepts today. I'll start with some conceptual discussions. I'll also help you understand the difference between terrorism and insurgency. We will define terrorism. We'll understand how India looks at terrorism, and we'll see how terrorism is different from insurgency. Once we complete these basic concepts, then we will be studying Khalistan movement, Kashmir insurgency and terrorism. Essentially, we'll focus on religious fundamentalism, state-sponsored terror, cross-border terrorism. All these key topics will be covered. You can just make a note if you want. I'll be covering some concepts. Then we'll discuss Khalistan movement, insurgency and terrorism in Kashmir, and India's counter-terror efforts, and also global terrorism. What is the global terror picture? We'll have a discussion on that. So this will cover related topics like religious fundamentalism, how religion is misused by radical extremists to create an ideological support base for terrorism. Right? I told you the first class that no religion preaches terrorism. No religion preaches violence. But unfortunately, in every religion, there is a strand of extremism. There are these political elements, these radical elements, who have deliberately misinterpreted their faith, given a wrong interpretation for their own faith. They project themselves as the savior of their religion, as the protector of their religion. If someone tells you that your religion is under threat and we are protecting your religion, please don't believe them. You could be of any religion, doesn't matter. If someone tells you from your faith that your faith is under attack by other faiths and we are standing up for your protection, kindly don't believe them. Those are the extremists. Those are the radicals. See, no religion is weak enough to be threatened by other faiths. Is that clear? Religions have survived for thousands of years, hundreds of years. This is just a political narrative that has been built in India and around the world, right? Where majority is pushed against the minority, minority against the majority. These are pure politics played by political parties, religious organizations, etc. They are misusing their religion, their faith, mainly for political interests, to win votes, to win elections, form governments, to capture power, to enforce their religious code, to enforce their orthodox views. That is the purpose of these elements, these extremist fundamentalist elements. So we will study about religious fundamentalism, and as I have promised, I'll be unbiased. We will not show any kind of religious inclination here, right? But rather we'll have a very neutral discussion, but we'll ensure that it's a factual discussion. We'll also study about state-sponsored terrorism. We'll understand how few states, through their intelligence agencies and their armed forces, how they extend direct support to terrorist groups and how they use them to target their rivals and enemies. India is one of the biggest victims of state-sponsored terrorism. Pakistan, Bangladesh at one point, China, all these neighboring countries of India have a history of providing state support for terrorism against India. We will also discuss what is cross-border terrorism, how it affects India. These are the various important topics we are going to be covering under this chapter. Understood? So first, how come India has become the biggest victim of terrorism? Is there any reason behind it? India's geographical location has something to do with it. Unfortunately, we are located in a difficult neighborhood. See, geography is something we can't change, right? We can't change our neighbors. We are blessed with these countries that surround us. But unfortunately, the instability present in our border areas and beyond our border areas in our neighborhood is directly responsible for India becoming a victim of cross border terrorism. What is cross border terrorism? Terrorism that's coming from across the border. When I say cross border terrorism, it means the terrorists have support on the other side. It means they're crossing the border and hiding in safe havens, in terror sanctuaries that are present in the neighboring countries. There could be state and non-state support for them. There could be foreign governments and their intelligence agencies which are hosting them, supporting them, giving funds, training, and weapons. Or there could be other non-state elements like criminal cartels, organized criminal cartels, and other extremist groups which are supporting them. So there exists a safe haven or a sanctuary for these terrorists across the border. So they are running away from our country, hiding in foreign countries, crossing the border again to carry out their attacks and run back into their bases in the foreign countries. This is cross-border terrorism. So India is located in such a difficult neighborhood. We are part of South Asia, right? We face the Indian Ocean. Our boundaries are very delicate, very sensitive. We have large coastal areas, very long coastline with island territories. We have thousands of kilometers of land borders as well with our neighbors. But from across these borders, land and maritime borders, there are many threats that enter India. Our geopolitical landscape it is directly linked with the threats that we face. Where India is located and the geopolitical environment in India's neighborhood is directly responsible for India becoming the biggest victim of terrorism. Is that clear? Now, I will introduce you to two very important regions present right next to India. Towards the west of India, we have a region called the Golden Crescent. Can you see this moon-shaped region, this crescent-shaped region? This is called Golden Crescent. That includes Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. These three countries located to the west of India that share western borders with India, they are part of Golden Crescent. To the east of India, that is towards the northeastern borders of India, we have the Golden Triangle covering Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, extending to Cambodia and Vietnam as well. Usually, Golden Triangle refers to three countries, Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand. But this extends to Cambodia, Vietnam also. Now, what are these regions? What is Golden Crescent? What is Golden Triangle? Who gave these names? Why are these regions given these names? That's something you should understand. These names were coined by the CIA of the United States, the Central Intelligence Agency of the US, the Foreign Intelligence Agency of the US. The CIA was studying the major drug production hubs of the world. It was analyzing drugs and narcotics production and trade and trafficking. Because as I told you in the first class, such organized crime is directly connected with terrorism and insurgency. It is directly connected with money laundering. So wherever such criminal activities flourish, even terrorism, insurgency, money laundering will flourish. So in a region, if there is massive drug production, drug smuggling and trafficking taking place, it will also be affected by arms trafficking, human trafficking, and even wildlife trafficking. Trafficking is nothing but smuggling, organized smuggling of illegal products. So these criminal gangs, organized criminal cartels, they run these networks. And unfortunately for India, we are surrounded by two such regions. The term golden refers to mainly opium. It mainly refers to drugs, narcotics. All right. So this is called Golden Crescent because all these are Islamic nations largely. That's why the term crescent was used. And here, since three countries were there, it's called the Golden Triangle. That's the name that was given by the CIA. So both are major hubs of drug production, drug trafficking, and all forms of organized crime. You look at Pakistan, Afghanistan, and some parts of Iran. Until recently, Afghanistan was the biggest producer of opium. The Afghan warlords, the Pashtun ethnic warlords, they have grown opium in these fields, in these farms in Afghanistan from decades. The Afghan Mujahideen, even Taliban, Al Qaeda, many terror groups, they've relied on drug production, drug trafficking to raise funds for their terror operations. Pakistan's ISI is directly involved in these activities. It has used terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba. It has used criminal cartels like the Dawood Ibrahim gang, the D gang, and they all have a nexus between them. So Afghanistan produces massive quantities of opium, marijuana, hashish, heroin, cocaine, synthetic drugs as well, not just natural drugs. Synthetic drugs like cocaine, meth, LSD, all such narcotics are produced on a massive scale in Afghanistan. There are warlords and criminals who run these networks, and this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. These drugs are mainly used as recreational drugs, right? In cities, developed nations, colleges, right? And across the world, the youth are addicted from US to India, Europe to even Africa. So there is a huge black market that exists. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and these criminals make a massive killing by selling and trafficking drugs. So there is state involvement. Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, is involved in enabling this drug network. And wherever drugs are present, wherever drugs are rampantly grown and trafficked, it means that governance has weakened. Law and order has broken down. Policing has weakened. Intelligence agencies are weak. Government itself is weak. So when there is a power vacuum, it will be exploited by terrorist insurgents. To protect their drug business from their rivals, they will procure arms and weapons. To run their illegal trade and business, they'll need cheap labor. So there will be human trafficking. Humans will be sold as bonded labor, slaves, etc. There could also be other forms of crimes like wildlife trafficking, even cyber crimes. They will all flourish in such areas, and they will use money laundering channels to move the money around. They'll be making millions and billions of dollars. So they will need a way to move the money around. And terrorists and insurgents will exploit this because they're very much part of the network. Because terrorists and insurgents, they need drugs to raise funds for their operations, to get their members addicted so that they are easy to brainwash. They need arms and weapons for their terror operations, right? So when criminal activities flourish, automatically it could enable terrorism, insurgency, and money laundering. That's why I told you these three are interconnected. Now imagine how unfortunate it is for India. We are surrounded by two such regions. Towards Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia, there is a massive hub that exists. Myanmar has recently overtaken Afghanistan with regard to drug and narcotic production. If you have read newspapers in the last 2 days, it's a very new development. Recently, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has reported that Myanmar has beaten Afghanistan as well to become the world's largest opium producer. Because in Myanmar, there is a crisis going on. There is a weak administration. The military, as you know, has captured power again in 2021. Since then, it has imposed an emergency and a civil war is going on. The political parties and ethnic groups and insurgents, they are fighting for democracy against the military junta, which has committed large-scale human rights violations. So the ongoing crisis in Myanmar has weakened governance, law and order, etc., and it has become a bigger hub for criminal activities. See, even before the emergency, since 40, 50 years, Myanmar has been a hub of criminal activities. But now in the last 2 years, it has increased even more. There are many criminal cartels here involved in drug production, arms trafficking, wildlife trafficking, human trafficking, and even cyber crimes and online fraud. Cyber crimes, online fraud, human trafficking, prostitution, right? They all flourish here from Myanmar to Thailand towards Laos. That's the Golden Triangle. This network spreads towards Cambodia and Vietnam as well. So for India, unfortunately, we are bound by two such regions. So these threats that exist, they spill over across the border and threaten India. Pakistan's ISI is pushing these drugs and weapons into the Indian Ocean as well. The Indian Ocean has become a route for trafficking drugs. From Afghanistan, Iran, drugs are brought into India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, taken to Africa, taken to Southeast Asian countries. So in Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal, Indian Ocean, which surrounds India, right? There are many ships that are moving around carrying drugs, weapons, sometimes terrorists and criminals. So this is a big threat for India. Recently, for example, you might remember at the Mundra port in Gujarat, right? A massive consignment of drugs was seized. The ship came from Iran. It was carrying nearly 3,000 tons of narcotics that was produced in Afghanistan. Due to timely intelligence that our agencies had, we managed to apprehend the ship and confiscated all the drugs. This was the biggest ever seizure of drugs in India. There have been incidents where weapons from Pakistan have been headed towards Sri Lanka. LTT has tried to revive itself by getting weapons from Pakistan and drugs from Afghanistan. Is that clear? These are small examples I'm giving you. Lashkar-e-Toiba has been involved in these activities with the Dawood Ibrahim gang to smuggle weapons, explosives, drugs. These are direct threats for India, right? Drug addiction is a social evil where our youth are getting addicted, their lives are getting ruined, careers are getting ruined, families are getting ruined because of drug addiction. So it's a social menace, a social evil. Along with that, it's a security threat because these criminal activities are directly linked with terrorism, insurgency, and money laundering. Now, if you ask me again, why India is the biggest victim of terrorism, it's mainly because we are located in a difficult region. South Asia is very volatile. In our neighborhood, there is a lot of instability. Pakistan is going through a crisis, political, economic crisis. It has bred radicalism, extremism, terrorism. There is state support for terrorism in Pakistan. Pakistan has used terrorism as a weapon against India. Obviously, what do you expect? From Afghanistan and Pakistan, drugs will flow into India. Terrorists will sneak in. That is one reason why we are under threat. The Nepal route, Bangladeshi route has been misused by criminals, terrorists, and Pakistan to push drugs, arms, terrorists into the country. Via Myanmar, Northeast insurgents have easily sneaked into India and conducted their operations. The Northeast insurgents hide in Myanmar. They have a support base. They easily get drugs, weapons, and funds, and even a base for their operations against India. China has been involved in supporting some of the Northeast insurgents through Myanmar. Similar threats exist in the Indian Ocean. There is piracy towards East Africa. There is movement of drugs and weapons which is happening in the Indian Ocean. Hubs have been created in Maldives and Sri Lanka as well, which is a threat to India. So we are surrounded by all these challenges, right? Our neighbors are not developed countries. They're not even developing nations. They're struggling with poor economy, economic crisis, political crisis, with military coups, as it happened in Myanmar, civil wars, right? There is radicalism which is prevalent, communal polarization across South Asia, and there is free flow of drugs, weapons, and other illegal products. So that is the primary reason why India is at such big risk. So it's very easy for state and non-state actors to exploit this vulnerability of India. Understood? There could be a question UPSC might ask you, why India is so badly affected by terrorism? What are the reasons? Why India is considered as the biggest victim of cross-border and state-sponsored terrorism? Explain. You have to present this analysis, draw a rough map, depict the golden crescent, golden triangle, and establish this connection between organized crime, terrorism, and money laundering. So this has become a fertile environment, a conducive environment for state actors and non-state actors to breed terror against India, to engage in state-sponsored terrorism, to engage in cross-border terrorism. Understood? There is a similar region, which is another global hub of drug production. It's in South America, Central America, North America region. Colombia, Mexico, and the Central American countries present here. You would have heard about Colombian drug cartels, the Cali cartel, right? The Mexican drug cartels. I'm sure many of you would have seen popular Netflix shows as well, like Narcos and others. So this is another major hub of narco terrorism. It's a word used for violence and terrorism triggered by narcotics. But here the angle is slightly different. In Afghanistan-Pakistan belt, there is a geopolitical angle where terrorism has been used for geopolitical purposes. But in Colombia, Mexico, the terrorism and violence seen here is mainly between the rival gangs. There are different criminal cartels controlling the drug trade and the trafficking routes. So because of their rivalries, their enmity, they target each other. They have advanced weapons. They commit large-scale violence, engage in terrorism to protect their drug business. So this is another badly affected region from Mexico to Colombia. All right. So these are the three major hubs of drug production and drug trafficking. Right? The Mexico-Colombia belt, the Golden Crescent, Golden Triangle. And unfortunately for India, two of these regions are present right next to us. And the borders are very challenging for us. You look at the map, our borders are very, very difficult. It's not easy to guard and patrol such a long boundary. Our land border is extremely long. Can anyone take a guess? What is the total length of India's land border? Any idea? What is the total length of India's land boundary? 4,096, 3,200, 7,000. That's all? Uni has got it right. I want approximate number. I don't want exact, but at least approximate number. Srihari has got it right. Kuraku has got it right. Purva has got it right. Shaili, Dhyaneshwar, Dikshit. Very few students have got it right. India's land border is approximately 15,000 kilometers long. I'll give you the exact number when we come to border management chapter at the end. This is the approximate number. Even if you remember this, it is enough. Now, can you tell me what is the length of our coastline? When I say coastline, it refers to the mainland India from Gujarat to West Bengal, also the island territories, Andaman, Nicobar and Lakshadweep. What's the length of our coastline? Very good. Majority of you are getting this right. Very good. Approximately 7,500 kilometers. Around that. Such a long boundary. So it's not easy to guard such a long boundary. Right? See, here looking at a map, sitting in a classroom, it's easy to say that we can have forces everywhere, fences everywhere. But in reality, it's not so simple. Right? If you look at the actual border regions, they're not well developed, not well connected. We don't have much infrastructure. Obviously, that's how border areas are. right? And these are very extensive areas. It's humanly impossible, physically impossible to have troops everywhere. It's impossible to fence the whole boundary. Despite the best efforts, there will be gaps in the border, right? Be it with Pakistan, with Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar. There are many border challenges that are present. The geography is difficult, right? There is a lot of support present by criminals, smugglers, and state agencies, even from the maritime route. There are so many gaps in the maritime area. The seas are so vast. The Navy, Coast Guard, they can't be present everywhere. It's impossible. So there will be gaps present in the land and maritime boundaries. This is what is exploited by the organized criminals, by the terrorists, insurgents, and by state actors. Got it? So we will study Khalistan movement and Kashmir insurgency and terrorism in detail under this chapter. Now, before we get there, we have few more concepts to cover today. I will give you a historical perspective regarding terrorism. It's a very different argument. It's not directly part of the syllabus, but I want to give you a new perspective to approach these subjects. We will talk about Kautilya's view on terrorism. Who's Kautilya? Kautilya, also known as Chanakya, one of India's leading thinkers. So we will study about Chanakya's view on terrorism, how he classified terror threats. We'll look at this after a short break. We'll take a 15 minutes break. We'll come back. We'll wrap it up. We'll discuss the foreign hand and how terror is used for different purposes. We'll also study differences between terrorism, insurgency, and insurrection. So these are all the concepts that we have. Once we complete this, then I'll start with Khalistan movement. So take a 15 minutes break. It's almost 7:40. So come back at 7:55. All right, we'll come back at 7:55 and we will resume the session. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the session. First, let me take some questions and doubts for a few minutes, and then we'll get back to our discussion. Anjali is asking, Sir, is there any relation between terrorism and deep fakes? Anjali is referring to deep fake technology, where AI algorithms are used to generate hyper realistic images, videos, etc., which are completely fake. Definitely, there is a concern about deep fakes being misused by terrorists. Because, see, through deep fakes, you can create completely fake images, visuals, audio, etc. In the hands of terrorists, such technology can be easily misused, right? To increase communal polarization, to instigate riots, to encourage more youth to take up radicalism and join their terror networks. For all these purposes, deepfake technology can be easily misused by terrorists. So definitely that concern exists. Next, Vedashri is asking how drugs are linked with terror. I am not able to understand. Is it so that drugs are used to manipulate the youth and then they are pushed into terror? You're absolutely right. See, terrorists use drugs for two reasons. One, to get the youth addicted, to get their members addicted so that they're easier for manipulation, for indoctrination. Drug addicts, they lose their emotional sensitivity, they lose their sense of belonging in the society. They become detached. So it's easy to indoctrinate such youth, radicalize them, and turn them into hardcore terrorists. And they also use drugs for raising funds. By producing drugs or by helping in drug smuggling, they raise a lot of money which funds their terror activities. That is how terrorists rely on drugs. Vedashri is also asking, we also see molestation of women by the terrorists. Are there any linkages between molestation and drug trafficking? I mean, we can't establish a direct connection there between molestation and drug trafficking. Molestation can happen anywhere. It's not just terrorists, right? It's not just terrorists who molest women, right? So I don't think it's a valid question. Next, let's see if there are any other good questions. Priyanka is asking, can left-wing extremism be one of the provoking factors for intensification of terrorism? Definitely. If Naxalism revives again, if left-wing extremism revives again in India, it could further increase the threat for India. Since we label the CPI Maoists as a terror group, that could lead to intensification of terrorism. Naman is asking, who are urban Naxals? He's referring to this term called urban Naxals. Now see, kindly do not use this word. This word has been rejected by the government itself. The government itself does not officially label anyone as a urban Naxal. This is actually a derogatory term that some of the political elements are using to target critics of the government. Is that clear? Naxal sympathizers is a correct word. With any radical ideology, there could be sympathizers that exist with Naxalism as well. I mentioned this in the last class. So there could be people, there could be students, teachers, or even lawyers who themselves don't want to take part in left-wing extremist activities, but they associate with the ideology. They sympathize with the Naxal cause and they might be giving some kind of support to Naxals. They might be giving donations, giving them shelter, giving them legal support, right? So we call them Naxal sympathizers. That's it. That is the correct word. Urban Naxals is a term used on social media. There are many supporters of various political parties who started trending this term. Anybody who criticizes the ruling party and the government have been labeled as a urban Naxal. A journalist, a opposition leader, or professors, right? Intellectuals. Just because they protest against the government, they criticize the government or the government leaders, they are branded as urban Naxals on social media. This is a derogatory term. Officially, there's nothing called urban Naxals. The Home Ministry itself has clarified. The MHA has said, we don't use any designation called urban Naxals. So please don't use this term. In your answers, don't use the term urban Naxals. The correct term here would be Naxal sympathizers. That is the correct term. And if anyone sympathizes with such radical ideology and gives support to extremists, they will be prosecuted. Is that clear? There are legal provisions available to deal with sympathizers and supporters as well. So Naxal sympathizers is the correct word. Don't use the word urban Naxals. Got it? Okay. So guys, these are some of the questions. Don't worry, I'll take some more questions at the end of the class. All right. Now, we were talking about Kautilya's views on terrorism. See, Chanakya, who was a court poet, a thinker, advisor of the Mauryan Empire, right? He advised Chandragupta Maurya. He wrote the popular treatise, Arthashastra. Arthashastra is one of the greatest texts to come out of India. In the Arthashastra, Kautilya not only spoke about land administration, revenue administration, and other matters of governance, he also discussed statecraft, warfare, geopolitics, foreign relations, and he discussed security threats as well. He dealt with espionage, terrorism or internal threats and external threats. Of course, the terms used were different. But today, some of these Kautilyan theories, they are still relevant and we can even apply them in today's context. I'm not saying that Kautilya predicted the future, but Kautilya did speak about different threats that exist for the kingdom. In his advice to the king regarding matters of security, he classified the threats into different categories. So this logic and theory developed by Kautilya can be applied in today's context. See, that is why Kautilya is studied even today. If you have taken public administration as your optional, political science as your optional, you will study Kautilya. You will study Kautilya's theories mentioned in the Arthashastra, right? Even though this is technically not part of the syllabus, UPSC is not asking you to read about this. But I am giving you a historical perspective. This will add more value to your answers. Now, let's say there is a question on terrorism. When you're writing the answer, if you can connect this with a Kautilyan theory, the evaluator will be impressed. It will add value to your answer. It will show to the evaluator that you're thinking on your own. You're connecting different subjects, providing theoretical, conceptual explanations. Right? So that is my purpose here. Also, it will help you understand how you can categorize different terror groups based on Kautilyan theory. Kautilya said there can be 4 types of threats to a kingdom. So today we can say that there are 4 types of terrorist groups, 4 types of security threats for a nation. Kautilya said there is an internal threat, an external threat, externally aided internal threat, internally aided external threat. These are the 4 types of threats classified by Kautilya. Internal threat, according to Kautilya, is such an internal group or a individual or a group of individuals who are your own citizens operating in your own country. They usually have a genuine root cause for their fight and they are trying to threaten the state. Such groups, which are domestic groups based out of the country, carrying out their attacks in the country, It is made up of entirely our own citizens, our own subjects. Such a group was classified by Kautilya as an internal group, as an internal threat. Now, can you guys give me any example in today's context with regard to an internal threat for India? We have mentioned so many different terror and insurgent groups. Can you name one group which fits this definition of Kautilya? Think of one group which is domestic, based out of India with limited or no foreign support. It is rooted in a genuine root cause, comprised of Indian citizens carrying out attacks in India and threatening the Indian state. Can you think of one such outfit? Very good. Many of you have got the right answer. Naxals. The CPI Maoist would be the perfect example for the internal category. We studied in the last chapter that Naxals, they do have a genuine root cause. They're exploiting it. They are made up of Indian citizens. They have very limited foreign support. Their attacks are being carried out in India. They are threatening the Indian state. So CPI Maoist or Naxals can be classified as a purely internal threat, purely domestic threat. Similarly, a purely external threat, the opposite of it, a group based outside of the country, operating in some other country, comprising of foreign terrorists. Usually our citizens are not part of this terror group. It only has foreign terrorists. And their attacks also are happening in foreign countries, on foreign soil, but against our interests. In a different country, they are targeting our interests, and they have no presence or limited presence in India. Can you think of an example for a purely external threat in today's context? One example for a purely external group. Some are saying Khalistan. No. Khalistani outfits have a presence in India. They have carried out attacks in India. There are Indian citizens who are part of it. So that is not the right example. Some are saying ISI. Please understand, ISI is not a terrorist group. ISI is Pakistan's intelligence agency. Here we are talking about terrorist organizations. ISI is not the right answer. Lashkar-e-Toiba. No. Lashkar-e-Toiba has presence in India. There are Indians who are part of Lashkar. Lashkar obviously has carried out attacks in India. Lashkar is the wrong example. Very good. Some of you have got it right. Meghna, Shrishti, Naman, Janvi, and few others. Even Kishan has given a good example. Taliban, Haqqani Network, even Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. They largely fit this definition. You take Afghan Taliban, they have no presence in India, right? It operates in Afghanistan. But the Afghan Taliban have threatened Indian interests. They have sheltered terrorist groups targeting India. And they have helped in carrying out attacks against Indian interests in Afghanistan. Haqqani Network is a branch of the Afghan Taliban. Within Taliban, there are different factions headed by different warlords, different Pashtun warlords. One faction of Taliban is the Haqqani Network, headed by Haqqani. It was founded by Jalaluddin Haqqani. Today, it is headed by his son, Sirajuddin Haqqani. This group operates only in Afghanistan and Pakistan-Afghanistan border areas. It is supported by Pakistan's ISI. It has no presence in India. No Indians are part of it. But Haqqani Network has carried out repeated attacks against Indian interests in Afghanistan. The Indian embassy in Afghanistan, Indian consulates, Indian diplomats and intelligence officers, Indian workers in Afghanistan, they've all been targeted by Haqqani Network. Have you heard about Kabul embassy bombings? Our embassy in Kabul was attacked by Haqqani Network. Many Indian officers were killed. Indian diplomats, intelligence and military officers who were deployed, they were killed in this attack. Many Indian projects were targeted. Indian workers were kidnapped. The consulates we had in Afghanistan, they were attacked by Haqqani network. So Indian interests in Afghanistan were attacked by this group based out of Afghanistan. So it's a purely external threat. Islamic State and Al-Qaeda also fit the definition because these are largely global terror organizations. Even though they do have some presence in India, it is very limited. Till date, ISIS and Al-Qaeda have not been able to carry out any major attack in India. There have been some Indians who have been radicalized by ISIS and Al-Qaeda's ideology, but their influence, their presence, their ability to carry out attacks in India is limited. These are largely foreign terrorist organizations made up of foreign terrorists carrying out attacks in other countries which threatens Indian interests. So even Islamic State, Al-Qaeda fit the definition of external threat. Next, externally aided internal. I think now you can get the meaning of these classifications. What do you mean by externally aided internal? It means there is someone outside of India supporting an internal group. It is basically state-sponsored terrorism from across the border. It is cross-border terrorism. It means there is a terrorist group which has a presence in India. There are Indian citizens who are part of it, but they have a foreign presence as well. Meaning they can run away from India if required and hide in the safe havens present in other countries. Meaning they have a terror sanctuary in other countries. So some foreign countries are supporting them. Some state agencies are supporting them, creating a terror sanctuary, a safe haven where they can hide away from India. And they might have some foreign terrorists as well. But they also have a lot of Indian terrorists. So they can sneak into India, carry out attacks here on Indian territory, and run back into their sanctuaries across the border. That's what you mean by externally aided internal. Meaning there are some internal groups with an external presence and they are getting external support. So this is the example for state-sponsored terrorism and cross-border terrorism. Now, can you mention some terrorist organizations which fit this example or which fit this category? Very good. Many of you are giving the right answer here. Some are saying Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Khalistani outfits. Some are mentioning Northeast groups as well, like ULFA, NSCN. Very good. See, I can give many examples for this category because we are the biggest victim of state-sponsored terrorism and cross-border terrorism. So all these groups supported by foreign elements, they are the correct example for this category. So Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, Huji, Harkatul Jihad-e-Islami, then all your Khalistani outfits, Khalistan Tiger Force, Khalistan Commando Force, Sikhs for Justice, Babar Khalsa International, all your Northeast insurgent groups, ULFA, NSCN, NDFB, and many others, Indian Mujahideen, all these terrorist organizations, they are externally aided internal groups. They have some kind of presence in India. They have some local support. There are Indians who are part of the organization. They have foreign terrorists as well. They have a foreign presence. They have sanctuaries abroad. They're getting funds and weapons from abroad. And this support is coming from state actors. So all these groups that I have mentioned here, they're all examples of the third category. Then comes the fourth category, the last category. internally aided external group, meaning there is a foreign terror group in some other country, but someone in India is supporting them. Someone inside India is supporting a foreign terror group, right? It's usually a reference to state support again. Maybe some state agency in India, some intelligence agency of India is supporting a foreign terror organization in a foreign country. It's entirely made up of foreign terrorists. Their attacks are happening in a foreign country, but they could target India as well. Or they've already tried targeting India, they have targeted Indian interests. Such groups are called internally aided external groups. Can someone give me the perfect example here? Think and answer. In India's context, there is only one example you can think of. Very good. Many of you have given the right answer. I'm really happy. The LTTE of Sri Lanka, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. It was largely supported, sponsored by India. Right? Those who have attended my IR classes would already know this. India played a direct role in Sri Lanka's ethnic conflict. I'll not go into the details here, that is for international relations, but just note that as part of geopolitics, India supported the Tamil militant movement in Sri Lanka in the 1970s and 1980s. This support continued for many more years. India's RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, our foreign intelligence agency, gave direct support to the LTT. We gave them funds, weapons. We brought them to India for training. It was Indian intelligence agencies which trained the LTT largely. And we used them to escalate the war in Sri Lanka. All right? Don't ask me why, don't get into the details now. That is for international relations. But please note that India had a role in sponsoring and supporting the LTTE. But this group went out of control. Eventually, it targeted India itself. It killed hundreds of Indian soldiers. The Indian peacekeeping forces that were deployed to end the civil war, they were targeted by LTT. Hundreds of Indian soldiers were killed. This terrorist organization, which once was supported by India, turned against India and assassinated India's former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. So clearly, LTT is a terrorist threat for India. Now, this is what happens when countries support terrorism, when they use terrorism as a geopolitical weapon. It's not just India which has done this. Many other countries, they continue to do this even today. Pakistan, the United States, Israel, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Iran, European countries, China and Russia, all the major powers, they have used terrorism as a geopolitical weapon. They have funded some terror group or the other to achieve their geopolitical objectives. And everyone has learned a lesson that these terror groups cannot be controlled. At some point, they will turn against you. It's like a Frankenstein monster. You create and breed and nurture the monster. Eventually, the monster will turn against you. Right? Today, Pakistan is the biggest sufferer. Pakistani state is under threat by terrorists. Just few days back, a major Pakistani military base was attacked by terrorists. Correct? It's because Pakistan is the one which created the hub of radicalism, extremism in its obsession with India. To target India, it used terrorism as a weapon, breeding multiple terrorist organizations. And today there are terror groups in Pakistan that are targeting the Pakistani state itself. For United States, Al-Qaeda is the perfect example. It was the Americans who created the Afghan Mujahideen with Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and others to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. Eventually, Afghan Mujahideen gave birth to Taliban, and Taliban was the one which sheltered Al-Qaeda that attacked United States. So many countries have learned this lesson, right? But they don't change their course. In geopolitics, in international relations, this is a hard truth. Many countries run such covert operations where their intelligence agencies work with terrorist organizations. They misuse religion. That's why I told you, problem is not with religion. Problem is with these radical fundamentalists who are trying to serve their own religious political purposes, and some of these countries that are trying to serve their geopolitical interests. They have misinterpreted faith, used religious fundamentalism to turn terrorism into a geopolitical weapon. Right? So, of late, India has stopped this practice. After some bitter experiences in 80s and 90s, in the last 30 years, at least in public knowledge, we haven't backed any terrorist organization directly. See, intelligence agencies will have ties and contacts with various groups. We may be sponsoring some groups to an extent, but again, we can't comment on it because we don't have much information. These are classified operations. Governments will never acknowledge it. But as far as public knowledge goes, we have stopped the business of supporting extremist terror groups. There was a time where we would engage in very proactive covert operations. Apart from Sri Lanka, we have been involved in backing several rebel groups, revolutionary groups, and even extremist groups. In East Pakistan, we supported Mukti Bahini rebels. Right? India was the one which armed, funded, and trained Mukti Bahini to fight the Pakistani army. That was a need, it was a necessity, because Pakistan was committing a genocide against Bengalis. Then in 1980s, when Pakistan was targeting India with Khalistan movement and Kashmir insurgency, we retaliated with counter strikes in Pakistan. We used various criminal extremist outfits to carry out counter attacks in Pakistan to put a cost on Pakistan. We are going to study this under this chapter. But after 1990s, our approach has changed. We have largely stayed away from directly supporting or directly getting involved with terror and extremist organizations. We don't do that anymore. Right? But again, we might be doing it. We might have done it again, but it's not available in the public domain. Is that clear? We might have contact with Baloch groups, the Sindh nationalist outfits in Pakistan. We might be giving some kind of support, but we don't know. So what we don't know, what is not official, we can't comment on it. We can't discuss that in the exams. Even here, never mention in your exams openly that India sponsored LTT. Don't do that because government of India has never acknowledged it. We deny that. We have never acknowledged the support given to Mukti Bahini. We have never acknowledged our covert operations in Pakistan. Right? So please don't mention that as your opinion. That will become a big mistake. But I have to discuss that in class because you need to know what has happened. I'm discussing this based on facts, based on media reports, investigative reports, then books and documents brought out by former officers who were involved in these operations, based on expert analysis from strategic experts. It's well established that we sponsored LTTE. We engaged in counter covert operations in Pakistan. So today we can talk about it 30, 40 years later. But the ongoing operations and the recent operations that have happened, we will never hear about it, at least for the next 20, 30 years. So in your exams, never mention that India has sponsored LTTE or extremist terror groups. Don't mention that. It can't be your opinion. You can say someone has alleged that Sri Lanka alleged India was supporting LTT. That is Sri Lanka's viewpoint. Is that clear? So be careful. I'm mentioning this freely because in a classroom, you need to discuss this. You have to understand this. But in your exams, in your answers, be very careful. You can't accuse the Indian government of sponsoring terror groups and covert operations in a foreign country. Understood? So this is Kautilya's classification, and Kautilya said, the biggest threat is the enemy within. Meaning, if internal threat is strong, out of all the four threats, internal threat is the biggest threat. Because usually internal threat has a genuine root cause. It's made up of your own people. If you don't address the root cause, you can never satisfy these rebels. And someday they might pose the biggest threat to your integrity and sovereignty. That's why Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, he said that Naxals are the biggest threat. Left-wing extremism is our biggest threat. Because Naxalism was again coming to its peak. But today, if you ask me, in 2023, which is the biggest threat for India? It's not Naxalism. It's not the internal threat. because Naxalism has declined. We have almost wiped out Naxalism. We have curbed left-wing extremist groups. Right? We studied that in the last two classes. Today, the biggest threat for India is the third category. Kautilya's assessment was that internal threat is always the biggest threat. He is correct. That is, when internal threats are at their peak, when they really pose a big challenge, that is when they are the biggest threat. The enemy within is the biggest threat. But since Naxalism has been contained to an extent, and it's been on the decline in the last 10-15 years, today, in the last decade, the biggest threat for us is the third category, that is state-sponsored terrorism. Because we have Pakistan and few other countries actively sponsoring terrorism, that makes it our biggest security threat today. Understood? So you can use this analysis in any question on terrorism. Even if the question is not asking for it, you can create a connection. Let us say there is a mains question on Pakistan-sponsored terrorism and its impact on India. You can mention in the introduction just one line that Kautilya in his Arthashastra talked about externally aided internal groups. So Pakistan is doing that today to India. As an external power, it is sponsoring terror groups against India as part of its covert proxy war against India. Look at the connection. Today's developments, you are giving it a historical perspective. Right? So that is how you can enrich your answers. Now coming to the next point. Since we are talking about state-sponsored terrorism, cross-border terrorism, you should understand the involvement of the foreign hand. Why do certain governments and countries, why do they use terrorism as a weapon? Why do they engage in covert proxy war? What do they gain from this? This is another important concept. If UPSC asks you, why Pakistan prefers covert proxy option against India? What is Pakistan's role in sponsoring terrorism against India? For such a question, you need to talk about the advantages of covert proxy war. Countries like Pakistan, the sponsoring country, they gain a lot by engaging in a covert proxy war. It's very advantageous for the sponsoring nation. That is why so many countries have been involved in sponsoring terrorism. From US to European countries, Iran to Saudi Arabia, Pakistan to Qatar, many nations have used terrorism as a weapon. That's because covert proxy war gives them certain advantages in geopolitics. Let me explain this. See, in a traditional, conventional war, the cost involved is very high. Look at Russia-Ukraine conflict. It's almost been 2 years, but the war has hit a stalemate. Even a powerful country like Russia has not been able to defeat Ukraine. Look at the Israel-Hamas conflict. It's been more than 2 months since Israel retaliated against the terror attack by Hamas. It's already contributed to the death of 18,000 Palestinian civilians, and yet Hamas is not yet defeated. Right? That's because traditional wars, conventional wars have certain limitations. A conventional war is where you are using your armed forces to fight a regular war, a symmetrical war. You're using your army, your air force, your navy, and all the weapons that you have, the ammunition that you have to fight the enemy. In a traditional conventional war, the cost is very high. What is this cost? The cost is money and lives. The economic cost is higher, the human cost is also higher. To fight a conventional war, you need billions of dollars. You need advanced weaponry. You need heavy weaponry. You need naval ships, submarines, aircraft carriers. You need battle tanks, artillery guns, assault rifles, rockets, and missiles. You need fighter jets, helicopters, transport planes, satellites, and drones, and whatnot. They're all very, very expensive, right? You have to raise large armed forces, maintain them. You need millions of soldiers. And finally, when you go to war, you're going to splurge the money. Your expenditure will shoot up. It's not easy to sustain a war in modern times. Those days of conventional wars are gone. Correct? Most countries cannot sustain conventional wars beyond few days or few weeks because the money involved is very, very high. Remember what I told you in the other class. Any conflict is about money. War is about business. You cut the money, the war ends. The economic cost increases beyond a point, the war will end. Is that clear? So in a traditional war, there is a disadvantage. There is a disadvantage for big powers, even for smaller powers, because the cost needed, the money needed is very high. The cost they will pay is very high. Next, the human cost is also very high. In a traditional war, you might lose thousands of your soldiers and thousands of your civilians. There is no guarantee how the war will progress. Even if you're a superior power, you can be defeated by a weaker power. It's possible. Look at how Ukraine has held back Russia. Russia has lost thousands of soldiers, more than 20 to 30,000 soldiers. Russia has not been able to fund the war. It's struggling with shortage of weapons and shortage of soldiers. Russia is hiring retired soldiers. It is hiring foreign youth from Nepal and other poor countries, pushing them to war to fight the Russian conflict. Did you know this? Russia has invited soldiers from around the world. Indians and Nepalis have signed up for money. It is outsourcing war to private military contractors because Russia is not able to sustain the conflict. The money involved is high, the human cost is high. Right? You will lose thousands of your soldiers, thousands of your civilians, and eventually the pressure will build. So when the cost is high, the economic cost and human cost is high, the biggest disadvantage of such a war is that you cannot sustain it. You cannot prolong this conflict. You cannot achieve your intended objectives. Your military, political objectives may not be met even after spending billions of dollars, even after losing thousands of your people. Now, our dear neighbor Pakistan learnt this lesson very quickly. Mid 1970s, I'm taking you back to mid 1970s. By mid 1970s, Pakistan realized that India is a conventionally superior power. India is a larger country with more people, more resources, more wealth, with larger armed forces. Pakistan realized that Indian armed forces are better equipped, better trained. It lost 3 consecutive conflicts. Its designs in 1947 was defeated when we pushed back the Pakistani invasion in Kashmir and retook most of the captured areas in Kashmir, except for POK. In 1965, Pakistan made a second attempt to capture Kashmir. India again ensured that Pakistan's objectives were defeated. 1971 was a turning point, a critical event in world history. India succeeded in breaking Pakistan into 2 parts. We liberated Bangladesh with our direct involvement. Pakistani army was committing a genocide against Bengalis in East Pakistan, and we directly aided the Bengali liberation movement. We supported the political movement led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman fighting for independence of Bangladesh. We supported the Bengali rebels, the Mukti Bahini. We gave them training, weapons, and funds to fight the Pakistani army. And eventually, we went to war with Pakistan. When Pakistan attacked India, almost exactly, I think 52 years ago, right? In December. 1971, India retaliated. We went to war with Pakistan and crushed Pakistan in this conflict. So as India liberated Bangladesh, Pakistan was split. It was broken into two parts. So this was Pakistan's biggest loss, biggest embarrassment. Even today, it is Pakistan's biggest humiliating moment. We not only broke the country into two, we captured 95,000 Pakistani soldiers as prisoners of war, as POWs. So this war taught a lesson to Pakistani army. The Pakistani army and the ISI, they realized that, see, we have fought 3 wars with India. And in none of the wars we have achieved our objectives. And the worst part is we lost our other half. Right? In front of the world, India has humiliated, embarrassed us. So now Pakistan swore to take revenge against India at any cost. The Pakistani deep state, we call this the deep state of Pakistan, the hidden part of the Pakistani state, the army and the ISI. It's called the deep state because they are the ones who make all the big decisions in Pakistan. They control all the authority. The civilian government is only for namesake. The democracy in Pakistan is namesake democracy. Right? They're about to hold elections. It's again a farcical elections. It's just for the sake of it. In Pakistan, all the key decisions are controlled by the deep state, the army and the ISI. So after the defeat of 1971, they realized that India cannot be defeated in a conventional conflict. India is a superior conventional power. They had lost 3 wars and suffered a crushing defeat in 1971. So now Pakistan swore revenge against India for 1971. So the option was not fighting another conventional war. Pakistan was very smart here. It learned the lesson and adopted an unconventional path. It adopted an asymmetric path. It realized that it cannot win a symmetric war with Indian forces. If you compare Pakistani army with Indian army, Pakistani Air Force with Indian Air Force, Pakistani Navy with Indian Navy, those are symmetric forces. Clearly, India had the upper hand. India had the advantage. And we have consistently maintained that. Right? We have more assets, more soldiers, better training, better equipment. Any day, India can still defeat Pakistan. Right? At least we can ensure that Pakistan is pushed back. So Pakistan realized this way early. It realized, why should we waste our money? Why should we lose our soldiers? Why should we lose our civilians? Right? Eventually, we'll end up losing this war. So it shifted its strategy in mid-1970s and adopted an unconventional asymmetric tactic. This is nothing but covert proxy war. Covert means secret, a war which is fought secretly. And proxy refers to the usage of a proxy, meaning a state using non-state entities to fight a secret war against the enemy. It's like you putting proxy attendance for your friend. Your friend would have bunked the class in college. I'm sure many of you would have given proxy attendance on behalf of your friend, right? So it's similar to that. A state using a non-state actor as a proxy on its behalf to fight the enemy. And these links between the state and non-state actor is covert. It is hidden. It is secret. So the links between ISI, Pakistan's ISI, which is the intelligence agency, and the terrorist groups, which are non-state actors, is hidden. It is concealed. They operate in a secretive manner. It's very difficult and almost impossible to find evidence, 100% evidence to link ISI with these terrorist organizations. That is how intelligence agencies operate. We call this tradecraft. In the world of espionage and spying, this is called tradecraft of an agency. They know how to conceal the links. All intelligence officers operate under false identity. Right? They set up fake accounts, fake companies to move the money. They might even give shelter but they can always deny the existence of these training camps. So they conceal the link between the state and non-state agencies, and they use them as proxies to target their rivals and enemies. So in geopolitics, this has tremendous advantage. Because see, on one hand, covert proxy war is a low-cost conflict. To support few terror groups, you need just few $1 million. Instead of spending hundreds of $1 billion on military equipment, right? Just use few $1 million to fund various terror organizations. And the human cost is minimized. You're not risking the lives of your soldiers. You're not risking the lives of your civilians. You are only using some disposable terrorists, a few hundred terrorists whose lives are disposable for the state. It doesn't matter for the state if they die. So such fundamentalists, radicals, brainwashed youth are used for this purpose. So it's a low cost conflict. The economic cost is lower, human cost is lower. So it means a low cost war can be sustained. You can prolong this conflict. You can keep waging this war for years, for decades. So that gives a big advantage to the sponsoring country. Right? It's a big advantage to destabilize the target country. So that is why many powers rely on covert proxy option. That is where the foreign hand comes in with regard to external sponsorship of terrorism. In the mid-70s, after 1971 war, in Rawalpindi, which is the headquarters of the Pakistani military near Islamabad, there was a secret meeting that was held, a top secret meeting. All the top army generals were present, the ISI officials, and even the government leaders were present. This was a strategy meeting. It was held a few years after 1971. According to reports, it took place in 1974. In this meeting, a call was given by all the leaders and officials present here. They gave a call for bleeding India through 1,000 cuts. This was the call adopted by the Pakistani leadership to take revenge against India for 1971. Bleeding India through 1,000 cuts. What does it mean? It means instead of delivering one cut through a traditional war, we will deliver 1,000 small cuts to India over a period of years. We will bleed India slowly to destabilize the country, to break the country. Meaning, through covert proxy war, we will exploit India's internal divisions. If there is communal division, we will further widen it. We will increase the communal divide between Hindus and Muslims, trigger riots in India. If separatist movements start in Punjab, in Kashmir, we will support them so that India bleeds slowly. If there are new radical groups, insurgent groups coming up, we will support them, fund, train them, give them all the support so that there are multiple proxies who will bleed India slowly. So it's a prolonged, sustained, secret war that is going on between India and Pakistan. Right? It's been going on from decades. It's going on even now. It will continue as well. Now, how do we know about this? How do we know about this meeting? Indian intelligence agency RAW had infiltrated the Pakistani leadership. We had a high value asset, a human asset within the Pakistani establishment who was working for RAW. He would be part of this meeting. He would report back saying that the leadership has given a call to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. Meaning, they will adopt a covert strategy to fight the secret war by using proxies, by using terrorist groups to destabilize India, to sabotage India internally, to increase our social divisions, to break the country apart. So that is why India is the biggest victim of terrorism. We have a determined neighbor, an obsessed neighbor, which has become a rogue state. Pakistan is nothing short of a rogue state. It has become obsessed with India to weaken India, to derail India. And its sole motto, its sole objective has been to use terrorism and various other tactics to keep hurting Indian interests. So from Northeast insurgency to Khalistan movement to Kashmir terrorism and the communalization of India, in everything Pakistan has a role. Why do you think it pumps fake currency notes into India? Do you know Pakistan's ISI is the biggest manufacturer of FICN, fake Indian currency notes? It is waging an economic war against India along with the terrorist war. The ISI has invested a lot of money and effort to replicate the notes printed by RBI. Even your new notes, the new currency notes that have been brought out, the ISI can bring very high quality notes, very difficult to distinguish them, and pushes them into India through various routes from West Asian countries, from Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. It is pushing fake Indian currency notes to fight an economic war, to cause economic destabilization. It is involved in sponsoring various non-state entities to target India, to harm India's image, to carry out attacks in India. So this is a persistent secret proxy war that Pakistan has waged against India. Understood? So this is a very, very important concept according to me. Because UPSC might ask you, what is a covert proxy war? Why India is the biggest victim of terrorism? What do you understand by state-sponsored terrorism? Why do some countries get involved in sponsoring terrorism? On these lines, a mains question can come. So using the example of Pakistan, you have to explain what is covert proxy war, what is state-sponsored terrorism, and explain the motivation of Pakistan to wage this war against India. Understood? So there are many global examples as well we can think of for such covert proxy wars. As I told you, almost every country has been involved in this, from US to West Asian countries, European powers. They've all worked with terrorist groups for their geopolitical reasons. Got it? Now, coming to the next point. Terrorism can be used for different purposes. It can become a tool for the sponsoring nation to achieve different objectives. Let me explain this. See, terrorism can be a warfare tactic for some countries. Some countries which are at war or which are almost in a state of permanent conflict, they might use terrorism as a warfare tactic, as part of their war against the enemy. I'm sure you're familiar with Iran's rivalry with Israel. There is intense rivalry and enmity between them. Iran has sworn to wipe out Israel from the map. Israel has committed to destroy Iran. Right? Both sides have targeted each other. There are no saints here. Both are equally guilty. So, as part of Iran's conflict with Israel, Iran has used many covert tactics. One of the tactics is to raise terrorism, sponsor terror groups to target Israel. Hamas, which has been in the news, which has hit global headlines in the last 2 months. Before that, many people hadn't heard about Hamas. Only few experts, few analysts would know about Hamas, right? And of course, our civil service aspirants. So today, Hamas has become globally popular, or rather infamous, because of the brutal attack it carried out on 7th October against Israel. It killed 1,200 Israeli civilians, right? Then you have another group called Hezbollah that operates in Lebanon, in the neighboring country of Israel. Hamas mainly operates in Gaza Strip. These organizations, these extremist organizations, they are sponsored by Iranian intelligence. The IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is Iran's primary intelligence and security force, it is the one which has sponsored Hezbollah and the Hamas to target Israel. They've also sponsored Houthi rebels in Yemen. When Israel targeted Gaza Strip and used disproportionate force against Palestinian civilians as well, Iran retaliated by furthering support for Hamas and Hezbollah. It encouraged Hezbollah to attack Israel from Lebanon, from the north. It also encouraged Houthi rebels in Yemen to launch attacks against Israeli interests and American interests. So, this is an example of terrorism being used as a warfare tactic. For some, terrorism is a tool for religious fundamentalism. They don't care about geopolitics. There are terror groups like Islamic State. They're only bothered about their fundamentalist religion. They don't care about anything. They don't fight for any country. They're not directly sponsored by one country. Right? They don't care about geopolitics. Their only goal is religious fundamentalism. So ISIS is one such example. The goal of Islamic State was to create the so-called Islamic Caliphate. Establish an Islamic Caliphate and enforce the rigid Sharia law, the misinterpreted version of Sharia. It is inspired by a radical ideology called Wahhabism, Salafism, which is a misinterpreted Islamic ideology under Sunni Islam. Many terror groups, they are inspired by Wahhabism, Salafism. These are fundamentalist radical organizations, be it Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Toiba, they're all inspired by Wahhabism, Salafism. It's a wrongful interpretation of Islam. This misinterpreted version has become the motivation for all the jihadist outfits. So ISIS is purely motivated by religious fundamentalism. Its goal is only to capture territory, target all the infidels, kafirs, and non-believers. All right, to target Christians, foreigners, of course, people of any other religion, and even Muslims, to target Shias and Sunnis, Hazaras, who don't believe in their radical Wahhabism and Salafism. So they'll target anyone who don't subscribe to their ideology, and their goal is to liberate the areas and form a Islamic State or an Islamic Caliphate where they can enforce their rigid Sharia law. So for some groups, it's about their orthodox religion and fundamentalist religion. It's not about geopolitics or fighting for one country against the other country. But for some, terrorism can be a geopolitical asset. Like Pakistan has used Taliban in Afghanistan as a geopolitical asset to become geopolitically significant, especially with US, European countries, and West Asian powers. Pakistan has cultivated the Taliban. With its control over Taliban, it got closer to all these major powers. It got funds and weapons from all these countries. It leveraged the Taliban control in Afghanistan to nurture anti-India terror groups. The first Taliban government that was formed with Pakistani support between 1996 and 2001, it clearly became anti-India. It sheltered several terrorist organizations from Al-Qaeda to Lashkar-e-Toiba, later Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen. All these terror groups, including some Khalistani outfits, were sheltered, not just in Pakistan, but in Afghanistan as well, in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border areas. So Pakistan has used radicalism, terrorism as a geopolitical weapon against India. So depending on who's sponsoring them, why they are sponsoring them, terrorism can be put to use for different purposes. As a warfare tactic, purely for religious fundamentalism and religious goals, or for geopolitical gains. So this is a common understanding that you should have. All right. Now coming to the last concept. What's the difference between terrorism and insurgency? We've been using these terms for 3 classes already. I've given you a basic idea about terrorism. We studied extremism in detail. I told you terrorism, insurgency are different types of extremism. But I also mentioned we will study this in detail. We'll understand what is terrorism, what is insurgency. How are they different? We'll also look at another type of extremism called insurrection. All right, I'll be taking 3 types of extremism. 3 types of extremism. We will study the features of terrorism, how you can identify a terrorist group, what kind of groups are terrorist groups, what is insurgency, which groups are treated as insurgent groups, and what is an act of insurrection. We will study all the three types of extremism. All right. We have around 30-35 minutes left. We can easily cover this topic and take up all your doubts and questions. First, let us start with features of terrorism. I'll start with terrorism, then we can easily compare this with insurgency. If you guys remember, I had already mentioned that there is no universal definition of terrorism. There is no universal definition of terrorism. It's not that there is one common definition. It's not that every country will treat all terror groups the same. That's not the case. The definition of terrorism is very subjective. It changes from time to time, country to country, government to government. Understood? But in general, we can define what is terrorism, at least from an academic viewpoint. If you ask me what is terrorism, terrorism is essentially a mindless act of brutal violence that is designed to strike fear, to create panic, in order to highlight their political agenda. That is an act of terrorism. In terrorism, see, countries don't agree on a definition for terrorism. The UN has some basic definitions, but not everyone accepts that. Not every country will classify all the groups as terrorist groups. All right. So since there is no universal definition, there is no common definition, terrorism and its classification has become subjective. It changes from country to country, government to government, and time to time. All right. But academically, academicians, experts, they have defined what is terrorism. In academic circles, terrorism is defined. Governments don't agree on it. Global community does not agree on it. But academics have a standard definition. Essentially, terrorism is an act. It's an act of mindless, brutal violence that is committed with the intention of striking fear, creating panic, so that they can grab maximum attention. An act of terror is designed to grab maximum attention from the government, the people, and the media. So by striking fear and panic, they grab the attention of all the stakeholders in order to highlight their political agenda. Terrorism always has a political purpose. To highlight a certain issue, a dispute, or a conflict, they carry out such mindless acts of violence. And as a result, they end up killing innocent civilians. They will brutally kill civilians. Because the more brutal the attack, the more sophisticated and well-planned the attack, the more attention it will get. Right? Government will pay more attention to it. Media will get obsessed with it. The public will start fearing that attacks can happen anywhere at any time. This is the purpose, the agenda of a terrorist organization. They are looking to highlight a political message, a political agenda that they are fighting for. To do that, they engage in brutal, mindless violence. They don't hesitate to kill civilians on large scale. So the idea here is to strike fear, create panic. So it captures everyone's attention and automatically it highlights their political agenda, their political message. So such an act is an act of terrorism. A group engaging in such violence is a terrorist group. Is that clear? Now, let us break this down. Let us look at specific features of a terror group, their principles, their doctrine, their strategy and tactics. Remember, we did this with Maoism. When we studied Maoism, I explained the doctrine, the Maoist doctrine, the ideology, the philosophy, the strategy and tactics of Maoism. So similarly, let's do that for terrorism, so you can easily understand what exactly is terrorism. Terrorism does not attempt to challenge government forces directly. Is that clear? Please remember, this is a general discussion that we are having. There can be exceptions. All right? There can be exceptions that are present. This is a broad discussion, a general discussion to compare terrorism with insurgency. First point to note, terrorists do not challenge government forces directly. What do you mean by this? It means that they don't challenge the legitimacy of the government directly. All right? Now you might say that, sir, terror groups attack government forces, they attack military forces. Like, for example, Hamas. Right? On 7th October, they infiltrated into Israel, killed Israeli soldiers. You might say in Kashmir, Pakistani terrorists from Lashkar, Jaish and others have sneaked in, killed Indian soldiers, they have targeted Indian forces directly. Then how come you are saying they don't attempt to challenge the government forces? Let me explain this. Please pay attention. There is a difference between attacking the government forces and challenging the government forces. Is that clear? The Maoists, the Naxals, they are challenging the government openly. What does the Maoist doctrine say? The Maoist doctrine says that we will fight an armed rebellion openly to throw the state out and to capture state power. That is a direct challenge. Carrying out attacks is different. Challenging the authority, the legitimacy of the government is different. Terrorists usually do not challenge the government directly. Understood? They will attack the forces, they'll attack government entities. That is different. But the challenge is not directly to the state, not directly to the legitimacy of the government. That is the task of insurgents. That is what insurgents do, like Naxals. That's why I told you, academically speaking, Naxalism is actually insurgency. Even Northeast rebels, they're actually insurgents. If you look at their doctrine, their philosophy, their strategy and tactics, you will agree with me that academically they should be treated as insurgents. But Government of India has the right to label any violent group as a terrorist group. Right? Under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, if the Home Ministry feels that a group is engaging in mindless violence, killing civilians and security forces, and threatening our sovereignty and integrity, then any violent group, extremist group, can be declared as a terrorist organization. So from the examination point of view, we will go by what the government is telling us. If government says Khalistani groups are terror groups, we will call them terror groups. If government says Naxals are terrorists, we'll call them terrorists. If government says Northeast insurgents are terrorists, Kashmiri insurgents are terrorists, we'll call them terrorists. Is that clear? So in the case of India, from our perspective, from our examination point of view, the guidance for us is from the Government of India. If MHA has notified a group as a terrorist group under UAPA, we will refer to it as a terrorist organization. But as a student, please understand that academically there is a difference. There is a difference between insurgents and terrorists. A very slight difference. Their method of operations, their strategies, tactics, their goals, principles are different. Naxals academically are insurgents. Few Khalistani groups and Kashmiri groups, Northeast rebels, they were all insurgent groups. But India has classified most of them as terrorist organizations. Other than that, there are some brutal organizations which are purely terrorist entities. Is that clear? But many countries don't agree with it. Like you take Hamas, for example. Some countries have officially designated Hamas as a terrorist organization. Israel, US, European countries, they've all labeled Hamas as a terror group. But many other countries that support the Palestinian cause, right, they haven't recognized Hamas as a terror group. They look at Hamas as a national liberation movement. India has not recognized Hamas officially as a terrorist group. Did you know that? Even though we support Israel's right to defend itself, We also support the Palestinian right to have their own country because Israel snatched that right from Palestinians. Israel continues to use disproportionate force against Palestinians. That is why we condemn the use of force. Right? That's why we have voted in favor of a UN resolution and we have voted against Israel, calling for a ceasefire. So that is a balanced position India has taken. But we have not officially labeled Hamas as a terror group. We condemn the act of terrorism. We called it an act of terrorism. But Hamas itself has not been labeled by India as a terrorist group. Is that clear? Remember this very important phrase. One man's terrorist is another man's revolutionary. This varies. That is what perspective is all about. Many countries distinguish between so-called good terrorists and bad terrorists. The Americans have worked with terror organizations. They didn't target them because they were serving American interests. In a way, US was responsible for the rise of Al-Qaeda, rise of Islamic State. Israel has worked with terror groups. Qatar has worked with terror groups. They don't target them. They don't call them as terror groups. Pakistan doesn't target terrorist organizations. It doesn't look at them as terrorist organizations. So countries are very selfish in this regard. They target only those terrorists whom they consider as bad terrorists because they're targeting their country, their interests. But in that regard, India is different. We don't make that distinction anymore. We are not in the business of sponsoring any terror extremist organization. We have stopped that long ago. And we don't distinguish between good and bad terrorism. Is that clear? Since Hamas committed an act of terror on 7th October, we called it an act of terrorism. That was the correct position from India's side. But the group itself has not been officially labeled as a terrorist group because Israel-Palestine issue is much more complicated. This war that you're seeing, the brutal, inhuman war going on, it didn't start on 7th October. Please understand this. There is a context, a historical context starting from 1940s. Right? The creation of Israel in an illegal manner, the snatching of Palestinian rights, the Palestinian terrorism by some of the radical extremist groups, support from other countries, Israeli abuse and exploitation, Israel's illegal occupation, illegal settlements. There is an entire context and history behind it. So keeping all these circumstances in mind, India has not labeled Hamas also as a terror group. So that is how it changes. Depends on which organization, in which year are we talking about, in what context. All these factors matter when it comes to identifying a terror group. Is that clear? But in general, we can say that terrorist outfits don't directly challenge the government. Is that clear? They don't directly challenge the legitimacy of the government. Like, let me clarify this with an example. Have you ever heard Lashkar-e-Toiba say that it wants to throw out government of India in Delhi and capture the government power? Has it ever said that? No. Lashkar's goal is to destabilize India, to highlight its political agenda, which is Kashmir. It wants to liberate Kashmir. It doesn't want to throw the Indian government and form the future Indian government. That's not the case. Whereas Maoists, Northeast insurgents, some Khalistani groups, some Kashmiri separatist groups, what do they want? They want to throw out Indian state. They want to capture state power for themselves. That is an insurgent group. A group which is directly challenging the government's authority and legitimacy, claiming state power to form the future government. That is an insurgency. Lashkar has never said we'll form the future Kashmiri government. Lashkar has always said we'll target India. We will liberate Kashmir. We'll aid the liberation of Kashmir. So, Lashkar has not challenged our legitimacy directly. It's not directly challenging the government, but it attacks our forces, our civilians. It engages in brutal, mindless violence. So we call it a terrorist organization. Terrorists, they commit brutal violence deliberately to strike fear, create panic, and draw attention. This is a very important point. You look at any terror attack, there is a lot of planning involved. They try to make it as spectacular as possible, as sophisticated as possible, because they know that an ordinary attack will not grab media attention. A simple attack will not grab government's or public's attention. Since their goal is to highlight their political agenda, they want to use brutal force. They want to shock the public. Now, why do you think we remember 9/11, 26/11, 7th October? Why? These were shocking events. It shook the world. It shook governments. It took media by surprise. Media blew this out of proportion because the attacks are designed for this. Now, why do you think Al Qaeda went to that extent of infiltrating US with multiple terrorists, giving them pilot training in American flying schools, hijacking 4 passenger aircrafts, and flying them like missiles into key buildings? That requires so much planning, so much funds, and the risk of getting caught. Why do you think Al Qaeda took that big risk? Because they wanted to stage the most spectacular attack ever. Without that, if it was a regular bombing incident or a shooting incident, everybody would have forgotten about it. Now, why do you think 10 Lashkar terrorists took the risk of coming through the sea route, through Arabian Sea, infiltrating into Mumbai, and went on a rampage for 3 days? They could have set off bombs and run away. They could have shot some people and run away. No, they didn't do that. They fought an urban battle. They held hostages, attacked 5-star hotels, popular locations. Why do you think they did that? To grab attention. Why do you think Indian Parliament was attacked? Right? 13th December 2001. Why do you think Jaish-e-Mohammed took the risk of attacking the Indian Parliament, a high security zone? Because Indian Parliament represents the temple of Indian democracy. So terrorists, they choose symbolic targets. They plan sophisticated attacks so that they want it to be as spectacular as possible, new. It should shock you. It should shock the world. That is when media, public, and governments will pay maximum attention. The moment you pay more attention, the agenda is highlighted. Their political agenda is highlighted, and terrorists win. Their goal wins. In 26/11, Lashkar wanted to highlight the Kashmir issue, the tensions between India and Pakistan. That is their political goal. In Uri attacks, Pulwama attacks, the goal of Jaish-e-Mohammed was to highlight the Kashmir issue, bring it to the international level. Same with Al Qaeda, right? It wanted to highlight the atrocities that Western countries allegedly have committed in Muslim countries. So every terror attack has a political goal. Is that clear? They are highlighting a message, sending fear, sending panic to grab attention. Why do you think hundreds of Hamas terrorists infiltrated into Israel? Why take that big risk? Slaughtering civilians, attacking military bases, innocents who are in their homes were slaughtered, right? Such an attack was planned by Hamas because it's a terrorist group. They want to grab attention. They want to be as brutal as possible to shock the governments, the people, and the media so that their agenda gets highlighted. Now, Palestinian issue is dominating global headlines. So in a way, Hamas succeeded. 18,000 Palestinians might have been killed. 1,200 Israelis might have been killed. But Hamas' goal succeeded. Their goal was to highlight the Palestinian agenda, to bring it to the forefront, to make it the most important issue. And they succeeded in doing it. This is the goal of terrorists. They are not directly challenging the government, the legitimacy of the government. Usually, they don't aim to form the future government. They do attack government forces, but they don't directly challenge the government. Next, they plan their attacks in such a way that it has to be spectacular. It has to be as shocking as possible, as brutal as possible, because they're trying to draw attention. They choose their targets carefully. They go for symbolic targets. Understood? Now, I'll give you one small comparison. You will be able to understand what I'm discussing. Now, let's make this interactive. I'll give you 2 scenarios. You tell me which will get more attention. Let's say today, hypothetically, there is a small bomb explosion in Mumbai. No one dies, but one injury. One person is injured. Right? In the heart of Mumbai, one small bomb goes off. One person gets injured. No one dies. On the same day, there is a IED explosion in Dantewad. Naxals have carried out a major IED explosion targeting a CRPF convoy. 20 CRPF Jawans are killed. Now, you guys tell me, which incident will grab headlines in India and around the world? Next day, when you open the front page, when you switch on TV channels, right? Compared to these two, which event will gain more popularity? I'll tell you one more incident. All right, in Northeast India, let's say, some insurgent group in Manipur has carried out a major attack. A lot of people are killed, right? It's happened in Manipur in a forest near the Myanmar border. So let's call these incidents A, B, and C. Now, you guys tell me in the comments, which of these incidents will get more media coverage? Very good. Obviously, the Mumbai incident. Why? Mumbai is a symbolic target. It's a financial hub, right? A global city. Even a small incident in Mumbai, that to a symbolic site, a important site, will grab more attention, even if the losses are less. A bigger attack in a forest, in a remote area, nobody bothers. Very few people will pay attention to it. Even if media covers it, it will be somewhere on the sidelines. Maybe for one day it will be on the headlines. They will forget about it. Public, they'll not even pay attention to it. Right? People don't know much about Naxalism. Northeast India is somewhere else for them. So no one will pay attention to it, except for some concerned stakeholders. The public media attention will be captured by the incident in Mumbai. Even though no one died, it's a small explosion, right? The attention will focus on Mumbai. This is human nature. It's human tendency, human psychology. And terrorists try to exploit that. Have you ever heard of a Naxal attack in Delhi, Mumbai, or Bengaluru? No. Naxals are least bothered in attacking cities. They can if they want to. They have never done it. Why? Because Naxals are insurgents. They operate in their stronghold. They don't leave their stronghold. Terrorists are the ones attacking cities, looking for big symbolic targets because they want attention. Insurgents don't want that kind of attention. All right, there is a difference between the way they operate. The effectiveness of a terror attack lies not just in the act, but in the reaction to it. Terror attacks are designed to push for overreaction. They want the public and media to overreact. They want the governments to overreact. That is when terrorists will succeed. Their political ideology will succeed. Is that clear? Let me give you an example. Now, what happened after Mumbai attacks? What happened after 9/11 attacks? What happened after Uri and Pulwama attacks? Just think about it. Think about these major terror incidents and discuss or just recollect. How did the media react? Okay, forget media. Media always overreacts, especially Indian media. Right? They're known for their overreactions. Forget the media. What was the reaction of the public? What was the reaction of the governments? After 9/11 attacks, US went to war. It went to war in Afghanistan, spent trillions of dollars for 20 years, lost 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers. That was the overreaction of the United States. After Mumbai attacks, there was tremendous public pressure on the Manmohan Singh government to go to war with Pakistan. Thanks to the far-sightedness of the leaders, India did not do that mistake. We used other methods to hit Pakistan. Diplomatic methods, covert intelligence methods, but not going to war with Pakistan. After Uri and Pulwama attacks, there was again pressure on the government to retaliate. But we used a measured response. Right? We carried out a surgical strike. We carried out the Balkot airstrikes. But imagine if things had gone wrong. Imagine if Pakistan had escalated after our surgical strikes and Balkot airstrikes, and if it had turned into a bigger war. Now, one terror incident leading to a war between nuclear powers is indeed a overreaction. That is what terrorists want. A India-Pakistan war is exactly what they would want. That's what ISI wants. By triggering that, the weaker power gets sympathy. Pakistan being the weaker power. Their issue, their political agenda, Kashmir, becomes international issue. Now look at Israel-Hamas. What happened? 7th October, there is a brutal attack by Hamas. All the sympathy was with Israel on that day. But because of the brutality of the attack, Israeli media overreacted, Israeli politicians overreacted, in general, Israeli people also overreacted. That is how terror attacks are designed. They went to war, used massive disproportionate force for 2 months, blocked Gaza, triggered a humanitarian crisis, killed 18,000 people. Now, today, where do you think global support lies? 2 months later, right? Israel might say we will destroy Hamas, we'll ensure that there is no terrorism anymore in Palestine. But where do you think global support lies? Majority of the global support lies with Palestine. Right? Majority of the countries have turned against Israel because what Israel has done is inexcusable. India, which is a close ally, a close friend of Israel, has started calling for a ceasefire. Except US, Israel has lost all its friends. So who succeeded? In a way, Hamas succeeded. That was their goal. They're ready to sacrifice their lives. They're ready to take the suffering. That is how these terrorists operate. They triggered a overreaction. So this is where governments, media, and public have to be careful. You should never give in for an emotional response. It's easy to seek revenge, seek blood for blood, eye for an eye. As Gandhi said, an eye for an eye makes the world blind. Right? Now, compare this with India's reaction. We have always been more mature in that regard. After Pulwama attacks, if India wanted, we could have also gone to war. But the Modi government was smart enough. Yes, we wanted to punish Pakistan, but in a limited manner. Instead of what Israel did, right? It went to war targeting civilians, bombing all civilian areas, and it turned the narrative. The narrative, global narrative, has become pro-Palestine, not pro-Israel. It's become anti-Israel. But what did India do? After we hit the terror camps, we stopped. We de-escalated. We ensured we didn't go into India-Pakistan war because we know what happens after that. As a weaker power, Pakistan can generate sympathy. As nuclear armed rivals, it can raise the nuclear tensions, bringing global pressure on India. This will highlight the Kashmir issue, and that will always undermine our own interests. Why do you think Manmohan Singh government in 2008, why do you think we didn't openly punish Pakistan? It's not that we were weak. That's not weakness. Showing restraint in the face of triggers requires courage, requires strength. All right? I'm not supporting one party or one leader here. I'm talking about all the parties, all the leaders. Shiv Shankar Menon, the then National Security Advisor of India, right? At that point, when 26/11 attacks happened, Shiv Shankar Menon was still the Foreign Secretary, right? Foreign Secretary to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. M.K. Narayanan was the National Security Advisor. M.K. Narayanan took all the responsibility. He resigned. Then Shiv Shankar Menon was appointed as the National Security Advisor, who would advise Manmohan Singh for coming few years. After his retirement, he has written a wonderful book. It's called Choices. He talks about Indian diplomacy, the choices that Indian diplomacy has made, and he has dedicated a whole chapter for the Mumbai attacks and how India responded after Mumbai attacks. Obviously, after such a brutal attack, there was a lot of media pressure, public and opposition pressure on the government to retaliate, to even go to war with Pakistan. The whole nation would have rallied support if the Manmohan Singh government had decided to go to war. Right? Later, when India didn't go to war, when India didn't punish Pakistan publicly, there was a lot of criticism against the government. That government didn't do anything, we are a weak power, weak prime minister, weak government. That is not the case. Shiv Shankar Menon explains the ideology, explains the thinking behind the decision to not attack Pakistan. See, diplomacy, governance, decision making is not so simple, right? The moment you give into emotional response, you already are on the back foot. If India had gone into a full war with Pakistan, we would be in Israel's position, right? Whole global community would have turned against us, favoring Pakistan, highlighting Kashmir issue. Do we want that? That is what the terrorists wanted. That is what ISI wanted, right? We knew what was the reason behind Mumbai attacks. Within Pakistan, there was a crisis going on. The ISI was losing control of terror groups. Terror groups were turning against the ISI. The ISI needed a reason to unite all the terror groups. And what better reason than an angry India? Right? 26/11 attacks was very well planned. It was timed at at the perfect time to instigate India because Pakistan needed a reason to unite the terror groups. The moment India is instigated, all terror groups rallied supported the ISI, and they came together. India knew this. So if we had gone to war, right, we would have strengthened Pakistan's terror infrastructure. We would have helped Pakistan bring up Kashmir issue, get more global sympathy, bring global pressure on India. So instead, India showed restraint, but doesn't mean we didn't do anything. Because you didn't know doesn't mean we didn't do anything. India did a lot. We used diplomatic methods. We brought in tremendous coercive diplomacy, brought a lot of pressure on Pakistan. We used United Nations, FATF, our bilateral ties with friends, and brought tremendous pressure on Pakistan and proved Pakistan's involvement in the attack. We brought evidence in front of the world. For the first time, we were clearly linking ISI with Lashkar and the attacks that had happened. This isolated Pakistan diplomatically. That is one. We launched a series of covert operations. We don't know much about it, but there are patterns, there are trails left behind to show that Indian covert operations were stepped up, intelligence operations, to hit the terror groups and Pakistan's links with these terrorist organizations. The same with Modi government. The Modi government also used limited force after Uri attacks and Balkot, after Pulwama attacks. We could have gone to war like Israel did, but we did not. We showed restraint. We only punished Pakistan to the extent needed with one surgical strike, one airstrike, and we stopped it. We stopped it then and there. We didn't go attacking Pakistani cities and Pakistani civilians because that would be an overreaction. So you need to be very, very careful here. Terrorists want an overreaction. They know media will overreact, public will overreact, political opposition will overreact, but governments should not overreact. They should stay away from emotional responses, think logically, think in the interest of the nation. Wars will derail the country, destroy your economic progress, right? It will pitch you on the same level as that of the enemy. Now today, comparisons are coming between Israel and Hamas. We don't want India to be equated with Pakistan, right? So a lot of thought goes behind these decisions. So why did I explain all of this? It's because you need to understand the goal of terrorists, how you can identify a terror group. Terror groups are looking for attention, publicity. That is why they commit brutal violence. They're trying to instigate the media, governments, and public to overreact. These are classic signs of a terrorist organization. All right? Insurgents usually do not do this. Understood? So inculcating fear, as we have seen in major terrorist incidents, that is the goal of terrorism. Terrorists usually do not seek to attempt to control territory. They don't have territorial ambition. Be it Lashkar-e-Toiba, Al-Qaeda, Jaish-e-Mohammed, all these major terror groups, they have no territorial ambition. They don't want to capture territory for themselves. But there are exceptions, like Islamic State, Hamas, etc. They are exceptions to this. Usually, terrorist groups don't claim territory. Lashkar and Jaish are trying to liberate Kashmir by backing the Kashmir separatist movement. Al-Qaeda is fighting its own jihadist war. They don't seek to control any territory, capture any territory for themselves. They don't seek to form the future government or state. Some exceptions to this are ISIS and Hamas. It is insurgents who seek territorial control. Right? We studied under Naxalism. Naxals clearly have a territorial goal. They want to throw the Indian state and capture the territory and form the future government. That is what the Maoists did in China. The Maoists clearly had a territorial aim. Northeast insurgents have a territorial aim. They want to separate those areas from India and form the future governments. So that is the difference between terrorists and insurgents. And also note down, terrorists have no limitations or constraints. They are not bound by human rights, humanity. They don't respect any international law, conventions, or treaties. They have no respect for it because they want to be as brutal as possible. They have no boundaries. They will attack government forces. They'll attack civilians. They'll not spare women, children, old age people as well. They will recruit child soldiers if required. They'll use suicide bombers, right? They'll use horrific methods like beheading. They don't respect any kind of ethical, moral, or international constraints. Whereas insurgents are a little mindful. I'm not saying insurgents are better, they're good hearted. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying insurgents are little mindful about this because they don't want to ruin their image by committing extreme violence. Like you would have heard about ISIS beheading its captives, or Al Qaeda committing brutal acts of terrorism because they have no constraints. But Naxals, for example, they are a little careful. They target government forces mainly, they don't try to target civilians. That is a big difference that you find. Because, see, tomorrow, if an insurgent group is claiming to form the state, liberate that region, occupy the territory, and form the future government, they will need legitimacy. They will need support from global community. They'll need support from local people. If an extremist group is committing brutal atrocities, who will support them? Who will give them legitimacy? Right? That is why they are mindful, not because they are good. Right? Now look at Taliban. The Afghan Taliban, technically speaking, is actually an insurgent group, a political radical insurgent group, not a terrorist group. Taliban is a political entity. They took up extreme violence. We look at them as a terrorist group. That is different. But academically speaking, the Taliban is actually an insurgent group. They wanted to throw the Afghan governments out, capture Afghanistan, and form an Islamic emirate, which is a clear objective to challenge the government, capture territory, and form the future government. Now, today, the Afghan Taliban, which has captured power in 2021, they are craving legitimacy. They want recognition from other countries, from UN. They want Taliban to be recognized as the official government of Afghanistan, but nobody is giving them recognition. Why? Because previously Taliban has committed atrocities. It has behaved like a terrorist group. So that is why this time, when Taliban came to power in 2021 for the second time, they were more cautious. They tried to project a slightly good image. They tried to show that they will not harm gender rights, they'll not target women, they will not violate human rights, they'll not target minorities. This was all a lie. It's not that Taliban had a change of heart. No, their ideology is still the same. They have continued violating women's rights, gender rights, and they've targeted minorities. But to the world, they tried creating a perception that this time Taliban is different because they want to show that they are mature. They respect ethical, moral, international constraints. So someone will give them recognition and legitimacy. I'll tell you a joke. When Russia went to war with Ukraine, Russia invaded Ukraine, the Taliban government issued a statement. You should see the statement. It's available on the internet. You can search for it. It is hilarious because the Taliban government urged Russia to not engage in violence, to not trigger conflicts, to be a peaceful power. Now, see, this is ironic. It is funny because it's coming from Taliban, which has used brutal, massive violence for decades, oppressed minorities, oppressed women, imposing its rigid Sharia. Why do you think Taliban made the change? Why do you think Taliban issued that statement urging for peace and talks and negotiations? That's unexpected from such a radical group. It's because they're trying to change their image. Terrorist groups don't care about it. Islamic State doesn't care what the world thinks about it. They want to be brutal. Lashkar-e-Toiba doesn't care about their image. They want to be brutal. But insurgent groups are mindful of their image, like Taliban, like Naxals, like Northeast rebels. Because tomorrow, if they succeed in their war, if they capture power, form the government, they want others to give recognition. They want locals to support them, or else how will they govern? How will they rule? Right? So it's common sense. So that is a feature of insurgency. That is a feature of terrorism here. I hope you can see the distinction that I'm drawing. Right? So this is how you can identify terrorist organizations. Understood? This is an academic discussion we are having, but nothing will stop governments from labeling insurgents as terrorists as well. Please don't forget that. Any insurgent group can be labeled as a terrorist group by the government, like the government of India has done. Got it? So this is where I would like to stop the discussion. So we've understood the features of terrorism. Tomorrow I'll resume the discussion. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow is a weekend. The next class, Monday. Monday, I will highlight features of insurgency again. So there is complete clarity for you. And we'll compare them. I'll do a side-by-side comparison of terrorism and insurgency. And finally, I'll explain insurrection as well. What is insurrection? So we'll complete this. It'll complete around 30% of this chapter. And then we'll start with Khalistan and Kashmir. All right. So I hope you guys have liked today's session. I hope you have understood everything more importantly. Do let me know how it went. I'll just take a look at questions, any doubts left, and then we can end the class. Akula is asking, sir, what about the recent attack on the parliament? See, the recent incident that happened in the parliament a couple of days ago, it doesn't appear to be a terror attack. It's an act of protest, mainly. Essentially, these were youth who were disaffected. I mean, they didn't get employment. They were dissatisfied with the Modi government, their policies with regard to inflation, poverty, the issue in Manipur, etc. So they just try to stage an act of protest to highlight their message. All right. So you can't say that it's an act of terrorism. It's not. Doesn't appear to be. Even though they have been booked under terror charges, right? Ideally speaking, the terror charges will not stand because they weren't attempting a terror attack, at least as of now, right? So it just appears to be an act of protest. Of course, it's illegal. They broke the sanctity of the Indian Parliament, right? And we need to see how the case will proceed. The police are pressing terror charges under UAPA, but will it stand in a court of law? That's a different thing, right? Because police will have to prove that they had a terrorist intention, which is very difficult because clearly it appears that it was more of an act of protest inspired by Bhagat Singh's bombing of the parliament during the British period, right? They were largely inspired by Bhagat Singh's philosophy. So that is not an act of terrorism. Alok is asking, does an extremist group get an excuse for its act on innocent civilians if done in retaliation to a rival state? No. See, violence can never be justified, no matter what. Now, see, Hamas might say Israel has oppressed us from decades. Israel has not allowed Palestine to be formed. While that is true, Hamas can't use that as a justification to kill thousands of innocent Israelis, right? Violence can never be justified. Hamas might say that it's retaliation for what Israel has done, right? Even though Israel has not allowed Palestine to be formed and snatched Palestinian rights, that is not a justification to kill 1,000 Israelis who are innocent civilians. So that can't ever be an excuse. Anshu is asking, sir, what's the major difference between Maoism and terrorism? Maoism is a type of insurgency, right? Terrorism, we just studied. What is terrorism? I'm also giving some hint about insurgency. In the next class, you'll get a complete picture on this. Maoism or Naxalism is a type of insurgency. So once we complete this topic, you'll get full clarity on this. So you're aware of what is terrorism right now with some awareness on insurgency. Next class will fully clarify this and we'll end this discussion. Manpreet is asking, Taliban is a terrorist group? Again, academically, technically, it's not. It's a political insurgent group. But many countries look at Taliban as a terrorist group. Anjali is asking, sir, in recent parliament attack, UAPA is imposed. Yes, that's what I told you. The Delhi police have pressed terror charges under UAPA. That's according to Delhi police. Will that be upheld in court? That is a different thing, right? What is a sleeper cell? I'll address this, don't worry. We are yet to come to those topics. I will discuss sleeper cells and sleeper modules. Manpreet is asking, ISIS and ISI are different? Yes, of course. ISIS is a terrorist organization. ISI is Pakistan's intelligence agency. Both are different. All right. So guys, these are some of the questions. I think it's enough for today. Let's end over here. Next class, we'll pick it up. We'll finish these concepts, then talk about the major terror movements in India, Khalistan and Kashmir. All right. So do let me know how the class went. I'll look at your comments. Have a great weekend and I'll see you back on Monday. Take care. Have a good day.